It all begins with a mysterious red energy emerging from the bottom of a crevice between the mountains. In the background, a man appears chained in the darkness, while a mysterious voice asks how he is feeling. This man is the young master of the Luoyang sword family, who can only manage a groan of pain with his face covered in bandages. His suffering is evident as the heavy chains that bind him continue to echo through the place. At that point, he begins to scream in agony as he feels the restraints tightening even more around his injured body. The mysterious voice tells him that he doesn't need to strain to scream, reminding him that his tongue was already ripped out in the past. The entity comments that it was not a pleasant scene to witness, but that she can perfectly hear the voice coming from his heart. Startled by all of this, the man asks who is speaking to him. He becomes desperate because he can't see anything, while the voice mocks him, reminding him that his eyes were gouged out with red-hot iron spikes. And the torture didn't stop there, as the voice insists on reminding him what happened to the rest of his body. She mentions the boy's delicate legs and arms, which had never before had to do any kind of hard work. As the young master began to recall the pain, the voice recounted how his limbs were severed one by one while he lay fainting in agony. He is horrified to realize that he had completely forgotten why he ended up in that deplorable state. The voice mocks, saying that he was probably too busy being tortured, since so much time had passed since his arrival there. Desperate, the young master asks if the creature knows what happened to his family, which causes the being to start laughing at him. Then, the entity reveals without any mercy that his entire family has been completely annihilated. She tells the boy to try to remember and think about absolutely everything he lost all at once. At that moment, a terrible memory of the fire that destroyed his family's home begins to surface in his mind. The voice whispers that the price of losing a family is something the young master already knows all too well. Memory reveals the brutal violence that spread everywhere during the clan's downfall. He recalls that his older sister, trying not to get involved in the family tragedy, ended up being beaten to death by her own husband. Meanwhile, her second sister, who was a skilled swordswoman, suffered an even worse fate. Her dantian was destroyed as punishment for ruining her family, and she ultimately lost her life at the hands of wicked bandits. The young master cries out in despair, saying that he knew nothing of this, for he believed that his younger, stronger warrior brothers were still protecting their home. The voice questions whether he truly knew nothing about this, or if he was merely pretending not to see. The organization notes that soon after he left to marry and live with another family, his relatives began a bloody war amongst themselves. They killed each other mercilessly just to fight over the empty patriarchal seat that had been left behind. The young master remembers when he used to spend his days reading peacefully, isolated from all the world's problems, just like you who haven't yet liked and subscribed. The voice suggests that, because he set everything aside to focus solely on his books, he ended up completely blind to the impending tragedy. He tries to defend himself by saying that he was just an ordinary man and that he couldn't have foreseen such terrible things. This excuse leaves the organization extremely frustrated with his attitude. She then makes the boy remember his childhood, when he was still a little boy beside his mother. At just 4 years old, he had already helped his mother organize hundreds of medical texts into dozens of volumes. At the age of 5, he advised the emperor himself on agricultural methods, and before he was 6, he predicted a great drought that saved thousands of people from famine. The creature claims that compared to his intellect, the world's greatest strategists and historians were mere amateurs. With a terrifying, shadowy figure approaching, the voice asks if he has finally remembered who he truly is. With his head bowed, the young master finally admits that he knew absolutely everything, without missing a single detail. He reveals that he was born under the influence of the celestial murder star, which meant that anyone who came near him would be doomed to shed blood. The entity begins to laugh loudly, saying that this terrible fate has already been fulfilled now that everyone around it is dead. The young master accepts his sad fate, realizing that he could never escape the clutches of this absolute destiny. He smiles and decides to leave everything that happens from now on in the hands of heaven. I won't even tell him what will happen next. The young man believes that, even if he does nothing, the wicked will eventually be judged by the law of karma decreed by heaven. Upon hearing this, the shadowy creature extends its monstrous hand and says that he is being incredibly foolish. She grips the young master's neck tightly, questioning why the heavens would care about such an insignificant human. The entity then decides to show him an ancient story so that he understands how the true law of karma works. The narrative travels to an extremely distant and mythological past, where mystical creatures flew over colossal mountains. At that time, there were people who firmly believed in the absolute order of things, and desperately sought spiritual enlightenment. However, while these devout people strove to be good, the most cruel men continued to commit terrible atrocities with impunity. These selfish tyrants lived lives filled with luxury and wealth before dying peacefully of old age. On the other hand, the vast majority of kind people spent their entire lives suffering from exploitation and misery, dying far too soon. Regardless of whether they were good or bad, all those whose days came to an end simply returned to dust in the same way. Given this, the organization questions how anyone still dares to believe in any kind of divine justice or karma. She claims that behind all this terrible illusion of fate, there is nothing comforting. There is nothing but relentless cruelty that silently rules heaven and earth. Ultimately, a truly fair trial never even existed from the very beginning. Knowing this, the young master lets out a bitter and helpless laugh as he thinks in empty terms like judgment and divine punishment. He wonders if it was all just a lie invented simply to console those who lived without any hope. It is at this moment that the shadowy creature extends its influence and asks if he truly wishes to obtain power. Without hesitation, the young master answers yes, and the entity immediately asks if he wants to rewrite destiny and save his family from all this misfortune. The young man reaffirms that he is willing to do anything to change that story once and for all. The mysterious voice warns him that the price for this will be to see his own soul suffer for eternity, wandering aimlessly and without rest. The young master accepts, declaring that he will seize this unique opportunity, using all his potential and the skills granted to him. He vows that he will be the one to control their destiny, causing the entity to celebrate that he has finally accepted his true nature. The creature proclaims that it will grant him the necessary power, enveloping the boy's body in a dark, pulsating mist. The young master feels the energy flowing intensely as the heavy chains that bound him finally begin to break. The voice commands him to open his eyes and look at her, revealing a sinister and powerful gleam emerging from beneath the bandages covering his face. At that moment, the chains fall completely to the cracked cave floor, leaving him totally free from his physical constraints. He takes his first steps, while the entity explains that the mysterious book before them has a cover made from the skin of someone who deeply hated humanity. It must be the people who forget to comment on the videos. The boy walks towards the floating book, whose pages were written with the blood of someone who harbored an immeasurable grudge against the heavens. As he reaches out to touch it, the voice reveals that the book was bound with the tendons of those who hated the land, uniting their paths under the same purpose of revenge. The dark book unfolds in macabre detail as the creature invites you to seal the contract once and for all in order to receive your new opportunity. The young master officially accepts the pact, surrendering his own soul to begin the process of transforming the darkness. A colossal explosion of energy engulfs the boy as the entity calls him the chosen one of destiny. The mysterious voice finally reveals that this forbidden inheritance is known as the scripture of the Dark Sovereign. Dark symbols cover the pages of the artifact, ready to seize control that once belonged to the apathetic laws of the universe. Faced with a horde of tormented specters, the entity explains that the power of that book is capable of devouring all the evil that exists in the world. While holding the mystical scripture, he is questioned about whether his true desire is to judge sinners and punish them with his own hands. The voice assures him that with his strong determination combined with that immense power, it will be possible to rewrite the destiny of the one he loves. From that very moment, the young master began to breathe and inhabit the deepest darkness. You can already see that he's even gotten younger. He becomes the sovereign of darkness, the one who will punish all the karma in the world, acting directly through the shadows with his blade of condemnation. Back in the real world, an immense beam of light strikes the Wangak Pavilion, which serves as the young master's residence. The temple's wooden doors slowly open, revealing the courtyard illuminated by the tranquil dawn. Inside the room, the boy appears lying peacefully on his bed, about to wake up from that long nightmare. Suddenly, he opens his eyes, startled by the full intensity of what he has just experienced in his mind. He jumps out of bed quickly, completely shocked, and with his body covered in sweat from the adrenaline. While trying to catch his breath, the young master realizes that his tongue is intact and that he can speak normally again. He notices his own face, utterly incredulous, upon seeing that his vision has been completely restored, with no sign of injury. The young man looks around and recognizes every piece of furniture and detail of the luxurious environment where he used to live in the past. He becomes extremely confused when he realizes he's back in his old room in the Wangak Pavilion. Looking at his perfectly healthy feet, he begins to understand the meaning of that entity's promise about having a new chance at life. Looking at himself in the mirror, he sees his young and intact reflection, realizing that he really has been sent back to the past. The young master discovers that he has returned to exactly February when he was 17 years old, before any tragedy occurred in his family. At that moment, one of the servants of the house spoke from outside the room, asking if the young master had coughed, and if he needed anything. The boy listens intently as the servants whisper maliciously about the lamentable state the heir has been in lately. They mock him, saying that the young master will soon lock himself away with his books again, and that he is a disgrace to the clan for being called the Swordless One. Another servant comments disdainfully that the boy's supposed past genius was probably nothing more than a silly, unfounded rumor. The young master finds it strange that he can hear the conversation so clearly, since the soundproofing of the pavilion should be the best in the entire region. At that moment, a dark aura begins to emanate from his body, making him realize that it wasn't just his hearing that had drastically changed. Looking at his hand, he sees mysterious marks rapidly appearing, confirming that the dark power of the writing has accompanied him back to the past. Yeon So-hyun excitedly realizes that her stamina, physical strength, and all 5 of her senses have improved in a truly impressive way. He wonders, feeling the power coursing through his veins, if all that overwhelming flow is the true potential of Jim Jinchen's scripture. However, when he looks at himself in the darkness, he becomes somewhat concerned about his current physical appearance. The boy notices that he is consumed by a demonic energy and a thirst for blood so intense that it makes him seem like a completely demonized human. Knowing he can't go around looking so frightening, he tries to relax his facial expressions to appear a little more human again. But, while trying to force a normal expression, a sinister and uncontrollable smile spontaneously appears on his lips. He begins to question what the real definition of appearing human might be, although he quickly realizes that this type of questioning no longer matters. With a little more effort and concentration, Yeon So-hyun manages to calm the dark energy and regain a presentable and friendly appearance. Determined to take the first step on his new journey, the young master murmurs that the time has finally come to begin his plans. He then begins to walk with firm, silent steps towards the exit of his chambers. Without hesitation, the boy forcefully pushes open the large double doors of the temple, revealing the brightness of the outer courtyard. Feeling the comforting warmth of the sunlight touch his skin after so long in darkness, the young man lets out a sigh of deep relief. One of the servants who was cleaning the courtyard observes him from afar, finding it very strange that the heir is walking completely barefoot on the stone floor. Immediately, the employees bow and greet him respectfully, trying to disguise the malicious gossip they had been sharing moments before. Ignoring their presence for a moment, Yeon So-hyun simply closes his eyes to appreciate the comforting sensation of the sun shining above him. The servants, however, begin whispering amongst themselves again, commenting mockingly that the young man seems to be acting even more absent-mindedly than usual. The icy, terrifying sensation of that eternal darkness, where he was trapped, begins to fade from his mind with each passing second. All that accumulated anguish simply dissipates before the welcoming light of the new day that begins. Enjoying the pleasant warmth of the sun, Yeon So-hyun suddenly turns around and calls the attention of one of the servants present with a firm tone. In an authoritative voice they had never heard before, he orders that all officers serving under his command in the pavilion be summoned immediately. The servant is completely disconcerted and frightened by the young master's sudden and firm attitude. A short time later, a large crowd of servants gathered anxiously in the pavilion courtyard, whispering without understanding why they had been summoned. Many of them openly complain about being interrupted during their rest and continue to disrespect the boy behind his back, calling him the Swordless One. One of the servants even spits on the floor in disdain, wondering to himself if the heir is merely trying to demonstrate empty authority to attract attention. Yeon So-hyun calmly descends the stairs and, looking down at the assembled group, asks if all the pavilion staff are already there. His gaze becomes incredibly cold and calculating as he stares closely at the people who used to spread malicious rumors about him behind his back. Without beating around the bush or offering any explanation, he coldly announces that from that very moment on, None of them are needed or welcome in the Wangak Pavilion anymore. He orders everyone to pack their things and report immediately to the head butler's office so they can receive new assignments far away. Outraged by the mass dismissal, the servants begin to shout and protest, claiming that he has no right to expel them so abruptly. They unite in an open and noisy revolt, loudly declaring that they absolutely refuse to accept that humiliating order. In his thoughts, Yeon So-hyun reflects on how naive and foolish he was in his past life to believe that his kindness would be repaid with kindness. He remembers how he foolishly thought that if he always acted with sincerity and patience, one day those people would truly respect him. But now he bitterly recognizes that it was merely a weak illusion he desperately wanted to believe in to avoid the world's conflicts. Seeing the outraged reaction and mocking smiles of the servants, Yeon So-hyun simply observes their audacity with complete composure. To the surprise and shock of everyone present, the young master begins to laugh loudly and ironically at the insolence of his subordinates. With an air of extreme superiority, he stops laughing, rests his hand on his forehead, and points directly at the leader of the rebels. The servant swallowed hard and stammered in response, immediately intimidated by the young man's sharp, dark gaze. Yeon So-hyun asks who he is, and upon hearing the man tremulously confirm that he is the heir to the Luoyang sword family, he validates the answer with an icy tone. Next, he questions whether those insignificant servants who so brazenly defy him believe they are the true owners of that property. The man begins to sweat and tremble as he realizes the gravity of the direct insubordination charge that has just been leveled against him. The heir calmly explains that the traditional punishment for those who dare to defy their lords is usually extremely violent. He cruelly adds that, at a minimum, the punishment involves the loss of a hand or foot, causing the legs of all the servants to tremble with terror. Completely terrified by the real threat of mutilation, the rebellious servants lose all composure and throw themselves to the ground, desperately begging for their lives. Their leader trembles silently with fear, swallowing hard as he realizes that the gentle aura of the former young master has vanished forever. They begin banging their heads against the stone floor while whimpering loudly, begging Yeon So-hyun for mercy on behalf of their families. Amidst desperate sobs, the servants swear on their knees that they never truly intended to disrespect him and beg for forgiveness. Yeon So-hyun calmly places her index finger to her lips and asks for absolute silence with a subtle and enigmatic smile on her face. Seeing them all bowed down and completely silent before him in a matter of seconds, the young man wonders if commanding respect has always been so simple. He smiles, satisfied that he managed, with a single psychological maneuver, to get rid of all the spies and unnecessary eyes watching him in the pavilion. As she slowly walks back past the bowed servants, Yeon So-hyun remarks that their lack of discipline was also due to her own past indulgence, sparing them a harsher punishment for now. He gives them the final ultimatum, ordering them to simply pack their things and get out of there immediately. Relieved that they had not lost any limbs, the servants desperately thank the heir for his unexpected mercy. The boy begins to give a new farewell instruction, but changes his mind halfway through when he looks at their leader. He orders that the chief steward be told to personally choose someone truly qualified to serve him from now on. While the servants flee as fast as they can, Yeon So-hyun refocuses on the pleasant sunlight shining above him. He finds it very curious how the sunlight seems to warm his skin in such an intense and comforting way. Even feeling the heat, the young man realizes with a touch of melancholy that he cannot see the sun directly, as if it were hiding from him. The words of that ancient promise from the shadows echo in his mind, reminding him that from now on his duty is to punish sins by acting in the darkness. Meanwhile, in a luxurious meeting room, a messenger arrives in a hurry, bringing an extremely urgent report for his superior. He informs the head butler that Yeon So-hyun has just removed all the spies and informants who were watching the Wangak Pavilion. The head butler receives the news in silence and thoughtfully reaches for a drawer in his desk. Although he appears calm on the outside, his fury against the boy's sudden insolence begins to manifest itself darkly around him. Back in the main office of the Luoyang sword family, the man realizes with seriousness that the long-awaited moment has finally arrived. He reflects to himself that he always knew that a reaction of that kind from the heir would eventually happen sooner or later. The man finds it fascinating how, after 10 years of showing no interest whatsoever in worldly affairs, the young man suddenly decided to fire all the servants at once. The butler recalls that he still hasn't been able to forget the striking image of when the boy first wielded a sword as a child. The memory of the perfect, devastating blow he executed so naturally back then still sends shivers down my spine. He perfectly remembers the shock of the people around him, who couldn't believe that such refined posture could come from someone so young. The astonishment was universal when they realized that the boy already displayed the imposing presence worthy of a true master swordsman. The head butler acknowledges that the period of calm and discreet monitoring of the young man has definitively come to an end. At that moment, the young Yunga enters the office and greets him in an extremely formal and respectful manner. The head steward greets her warmly and asks her to come closer, as he has a mission of utmost importance to entrust to her. The girl complies with the request and moves towards the man's table without any hesitation. The butler explains that he has always had great affection for her, and that therefore, he was very careful in choosing who would be her true master from now on. He reveals that the Luoyang clan's line of succession is about to undergo a drastic change, and that the young master will be at the very center of it all. He stares intently at the girl and gives her the option of choosing whether or not she wants to personally serve at the Wangak Pavilion. Jung-ah clenches his fist with determination and readily accepts the mission, vowing to faithfully obey his orders. The man is very pleased with the decision, knowing that her special golden eyes will be crucial in deciphering Yeon So-hyun's true intentions. Shortly after, Jung-ah arrives before the imposing Pavilion of Original Awakening, gazing seriously at the entrance. She observes the colossal structure before her, recognizing it as the legendary residence of the clan's main heir. She remembers the head butler's words about the grandeur and power of that defensive structure protecting the young man's quarters. As she approached the gate, one of the guards, who had been relaxing, questioned her about who she was and what she was doing there. Jung-ah finds it utterly absurd to see the guards relaxing and dozing off in the middle of the day during their shift patrolling such an important area. However, she quickly realizes that those men are not ordinary sentinels, but rather highly experienced warriors assigned to that specific area. With a calm and unflappable demeanor, she formally introduces herself as the new personal maid in charge of serving in the pavilion. She hands over the scroll with the written order, coming directly from the head steward, so they can verify her credentials. A scarred and sleepy guard shrugs and orders them to just let her pass without causing any more trouble. Jung-ah is a little puzzled by the fact that they let her through so easily and without even searching her belongings. Slowly, the heavy wooden gates at the main entrance begin to be opened by the sentinels to allow their passage. The young maid attentively observes the mysterious interior of the pavilion, which begins to reveal itself before her eyes. A path surrounded by a dense forest, illuminated by the sun's rays, appears soon after she crosses the large entrance. Before she moves on, one of the guards decides to give one last important warning, alerting her to the dangers of the place. Upon hearing the man's enigmatic words, Jung-ah immediately stops walking and shows surprise at the information. She enters the wooded path, feeling a strangely dense and mystical atmosphere begin to surround her on all sides. The girl quickly realizes that the path through the trees is by no means an ordinary garden path. She notices the presence of an extremely complex and powerful magical defensive formation protecting the entrance to the inner area. She mentally thanks herself for possessing her special golden eyes, for without them it would be impossible to navigate safely through that labyrinth. The young woman feels immense spiritual pressure emanating from the trees that form the barrier, making her feel extremely vulnerable in that environment. Suddenly, a hidden presence high in the treetops senses her approach and lets out a soft murmur of curiosity at her arrival. Looking at her from above, Yeon So-hyun finds it very intriguing how a seemingly ordinary girl with no inner energy manages to perceive and navigate through that complex defensive barrier. Suddenly, Jung-ah feels a sudden chill and stops walking immediately, sensing that she is no longer alone on that trail. She turns quickly with an alert expression, searching with her eyes for the source of that mysterious feeling that surrounded her. In the middle of the wooded trail, the imposing silhouette of Yeon So-hyun emerges, walking calmly and deliberately towards you. He stops a few meters away from the maid and directly questions her about the intriguing way she's looking at him. A mocking smile appears on the young master's face as he comments that she is quite an unusual person for a simple servant. Jung-ah is completely paralyzed and in shock, feeling firsthand the immense spiritual pressure emanating from the young man. Her mind is suddenly drawn into a terrifying vision where she finds herself lost in utter spiritual darkness. In the middle of absolute nowhere, a small, bright bluish flame begins to emerge before his wide eyes. The light from that flame soon reveals the silhouette of a terrifying monster with one eye glowing intensely in a bluish hue. She awakens from that terrible illusion with a gasping sigh, feeling as if she were truly drowning in deep, icy waters. Several dark, ghostly hands begin to emerge from beneath the illusory water, mercilessly attempting to pull her to the bottom. The girl lets out a scream of terror as she is grabbed and dragged relentlessly by that supernatural force. Young-ah tries to fight desperately, but dark hands cover her mouth, preventing any attempt to call for help. With her golden eyes filled with panic, she mentally pleads for someone to appear and save her from that terrible fate. She reaches out one last time toward the surface, pleading for help before finally losing her strength. Suddenly, a firm, real hand grips hers tightly, interrupting that terrible mental illusion. Yeon So-hyun catches her in her arms the exact moment she loses consciousness and collapses on the forest floor. Looking closely at the young woman's face, the boy realizes that the head butler has indeed sent a very interesting girl to his pavilion. Later, Young-ah wakes up lying comfortably in a bed inside a very clean and well-decorated room. She sits up quickly, still a little dazed, and begins to look around, trying to understand where she is. Observing the simplicity and elegance of the room, she concludes that it is very cozy. As she puts her feet on the floor, she accidentally bumps into a pile of books scattered across the wooden floor. Looking at the open page of one of the books, she notices detailed illustrations of human anatomy and rare medicinal plants. Intrigued by the contents, the young maid gently reaches out to touch the pages of that mysterious manuscript. She lifts the book toward her face, reading its contents with her bright golden eyes. Young-ah is impressed to find that the book details everything about medicine from various sects and advanced breathing control techniques. She looks at the large bookshelves around her and wonders if all the other books in that room also deal with such complex and secret subjects. The girl is shocked to discover that rare manuscripts, which should only be kept in the imperial palace, are there in that forgotten pavilion. Suddenly, a soft noise from outside catches her attention, making her look confusedly towards the sliding door. The wind blows gently, carrying with it a few flower petals that pass softly before her golden eyes. The sliding wooden door slowly opens, revealing the beautiful exterior view of Yeon So-hyun's pavilion. Young-ah sighs in admiration as she contemplates the marvelous scenery unfolding before her. Before your eyes unfolds a stunning landscape with elegant bridges, a calm river, and cherry blossoms bathed in sunlight. She finds it unbelievable, remembering that it's still winter in the outside world, but that inside it seems like full spring. Yeon So-hyun appears in the garden, asking if she slept well and telling her to come down when she's ready, making her aware that he is the main heir of the clan. A little embarrassed and blushing slightly in his presence, Young-ah promptly replies yes. Later, as the sun begins to set on the horizon, the young master seriously asks her if her name really is Young-ah. After she confirmed her name, the young man casually commented that she was quite heavy when he had to carry her in his arms. She is confused and embarrassed by the comment, but soon remembers that she had fainted in the middle of that magical forest. He jokingly insists that he perfectly remembers when she collapsed in his arms, leaving her completely embarrassed. He explains that he found her fallen while walking and that, despite the pleasant climate there, she would have had serious problems if she had remained exposed to the magical barrier for any longer. Young-ah bows deeply in gratitude, solemnly vowing that he will never forget the favor and that he will serve him with all his soul. However, the young man coldly interrupts her, showing her the parchment and reminding her that he never said he would accept her as his personal servant in that place. He throws the document dismissively to the ground, ordering her to pick it up and leave the building immediately. The girl's golden eyes widen in utter shock at the boy's cold and relentless rejection. Desperate at the failure of her mission, she kneels and presses her forehead to the ground, begging for forgiveness and even accepting the death penalty. Yeon So-hyun silently observes her despair, noticing the young woman's trembling hands clutching her own clothes tightly. While she vows to do anything to make up for her mistake, Yeon So-hyun notices the golden glint in her eyes and recognizes her as the same mysterious woman from her previous life. An enigmatic smile appears on the heir's face as he considers how ironic and twisted fate is in bringing them together again in this new opportunity. He fixes his gaze on her, aware that this humble young woman is, in fact, the legendary and feared golden-eyed witch of his past. Suddenly, Yeon So-yeon changes the subject and directly asks if she knows how to cook, leaving her somewhat confused by the sudden question. He approaches with an intriguing smile and playfully confirms that he really wants to know if she knows how to cook. A short time later, a bonfire crackles with intense flames in the pavilion's kitchen as preparations begin. While fanning the embers, Jung-ah reflects with frustration that she ended up in that situation as a cook, simply because she fainted on the way through the forest. Still, the memory of that terrifying creature with the glowing eye that she saw during her fainting spell continues to intensely haunt her mind. She lets out a long sigh of relief, trying to convince herself that it was all just a silly nightmare brought on by the day's exhaustion. Gently patting her own cheeks to regain focus, she decides to concentrate all her energy solely on preparing the young master's meal. While quickly chopping the ingredients, she's impressed by how much Yeon So-yeon has shaken her calm demeanor, wondering why everyone in the clan called him useless or swordless. The young man suddenly appears right behind her, curiously asking if dinner will be meatballs, causing her to answer in surprise without realizing who was there. Turning around startled, she finds the young chef joking that for someone who is cooking, nothing should be more important than the evening's menu itself. She tries to explain herself awkwardly, while the boy just smiles slightly and asks her not to take too long, as he is extremely hungry. Still a little flushed and tense from his sudden closeness, Jung-ah simply nods and quickly returns her focus to the pots and pans in the kitchen. Shortly after, a lavish table full of delicious dishes is served in the dining room, earning sincere praise from Yeon So-yeon for the speed and excellent appearance of the food. He settles into his chair and invites her to join him for the meal, but she shyly declines, saying she prefers to eat only after her master has finished. However, his expression abruptly changes to a frigid seriousness as he curtly orders her to sit with him. Faced with the relentless warning that he should not repeat the order, the maid has no choice but to obey and sit down at the table immediately. Using chopsticks, the young chef picks up a juicy meatball and gently offers it to her so she can try the dish herself. Jung-ah extends her bowl of rice, completely bewildered and surprised by such generous treatment from a nobleman. As he puts even more food into her bowl, the girl stammers nervously, unsure how to act while eating next to her master. The boy stares at her with a serious look and firmly insists that she stop hesitating and start eating soon before it gets cold. Having run out of excuses to offer in the face of his insistence, she finally, timidly, and silently takes the first bite of food. He observes her very attentively and asks if she liked the recipe, receiving a shy, positive confirmation from the young maid. Satisfied with her response, Yeon So-yeon decides that it's finally her turn to taste the dishes she prepared with so much effort. With a genuine smile, he highly praises the flavor, highlighting that the simple seasoning is perfectly balanced and incredibly delicious. Quickly and enthusiastically, the boy extends his empty bowl and asks her to pour him another generous portion of that meal. Eating with immense satisfaction, he continues to praise the seasoning of the food and repeatedly requests new portions. Night falls, and the full moon shines high in the sky while the young master's voice, calling for more dishes, continues to echo through the silent pavilion. Finally, Jung-ah timidly apologizes, saying that all the food is gone, which makes the boy accept that it's best to stop there, even though he still feels a strange emptiness in his stomach. As he retires from the dining room, the maid asks if she should prepare some tea, but he thoughtfully declines, saying he prefers a good wine. Sitting on the rooftop under the moonlight, he finds it very strange that he still feels so hungry even after eating so much, concluding that the only reason for this insatiable emptiness can only be a side effect of the scripture of Jim Jinchun. An ironic smile appears on his face as he considers whether the price for obtaining a demonic art capable of reversing time and distorting destiny would be merely an insatiable stomach. Suddenly, several shadowy, ghostly hands begin to grab his face while the entity's voice echoes mockingly, asking if he really thought the price would be so simple. The presence of darkness tightens around the boy's face in a suffocating way, causing his eye to glow intensely with a malevolent purple energy. An immense aura of dark, malevolent mist explodes around his body as he remains paralyzed beneath the night sky and moonlight. Yeon So-yeon lowers her head with a somber and focused expression, feeling the creature's strong influence growing in her mind. The demonic entity manifests itself right next to his ear and whispers ominously that the time has finally come to fulfill their agreement. With a sudden and overwhelming impulse, the creature calls for them to immediately begin feasting on what is to come in the darkness. The demonic silhouette darts swiftly through the air, announcing furiously that this will be the hour of its grand feast of souls and energy. Far away, a tranquil night envelops a bustling inn located in the heart of Luoyang's urban area. Inside the inn, the owner politely tries to inform a stubborn customer that the place is completely full on that busy night. Ignoring the owner's desperate warnings, the man arrogantly walks into the dining room, claiming he clearly saw an empty table to sit at. However, as he approached the empty table he had spotted from afar, the customer suddenly stopped walking and let out a murmur of utter bewilderment at what he saw. The owner of the establishment, who was right behind him trying to restrain him, widens his eyes and is completely paralyzed with horror at the horrific scene before him. A monstrous mouth emerges, savagely and disgustingly devouring a thick, dark substance with trembling, blood-stained hands. Yeon So-hyun is revealed there in the dark corner of the hall, stuffing pieces of raw meat into her mouth with a completely crazed and demonic look. He devours everything in a bestial way in the dim light, mentally repeating that none of it is enough to satiate the insatiable hunger for energy that consumes his body. The man who had entered was paralyzed with pure horror upon witnessing that bizarre scene of bloody savagery right in front of him. His legs trembling uncontrollably, he stammers in terror, mistaking the young master for a terrifying, hungry ghost from hell itself. He turns around and runs screaming from the inn, yelling desperately for anyone who will listen that a hungry ghost from hell had appeared inside. Meanwhile, in the dark corner of the hall, Yeon So-hyun completely ignores the commotion and continues devouring everything frantically, muttering that this ordinary food would never be enough to satisfy him. Suddenly, Yeon So-hyun abruptly stands up amidst the purple mist that ominously begins to fill the inn's hall. He quickly turns his head when he catches a very specific scent that immediately grabs his attention. The boy begins to walk silently towards the exit, casting a large, mysterious shadow on the wall of the room. The remaining guests and guards at the inn watch him pass by, completely intimidated and in total silence. As he walks past the reception desk, he very calmly asks the trembling owner what the total bill is. Too terrified by the young man's energy to respond coherently, the man simply stammers, unable to form a sentence. Yeon So-hyun places a heavy bag of coins on the counter with a smile, assuring herself that the amount should be more than enough for the payment. The owner thanks them tremblingly, while the men in the room whisper, pale with fear, and decide to leave as quickly as possible to avoid trouble. Sitting under the full moon on a rooftop, the boy laments the fact that, even after eating so much ordinary food, his terrible hunger remains insatiable. He wonders to himself if he has truly become some kind of hungry ghost, descended directly from the depths of hell. The young man shakes his head negatively, trying to push those disturbing and dark thoughts from his mind. Suddenly, a thick red mist rises in the air, and he catches a strong, distinctive scent of fresh blood emanating from a nearby alley. His eyes darken completely, and a bizarre smile appears on his face as he precisely identifies the source of that smell. Overwhelmed by an all-out malevolent energy, he leaps toward the source of the scent, describing the smell of blood as something utterly delicious. In a dark, isolated alley in the city, violent sounds of beatings begin to echo loudly off the walls of the houses. A severely injured and bloodied man is brutally thrown onto the damp stone floor of the alley. The Black Bones faction's henchmen surround him mockingly, questioning how he dared to rob their boss, and if he thought the gang was some kind of joke. Fallen and injured, the man angrily protests, saying that charging exorbitant interest on a simple debt is an intolerable absurdity practiced by bloodsuckers. One of the criminals mercilessly stomps on his injured hand to silence him, causing the poor man to let out a groan of pure pain. The group leader orders them to stop the violence right there, deciding only to steal the man's ID card before leaving. One of the henchmen leans down quickly and roughly extends his hand to snatch the object from the trembling hands of the fallen victim. Holding the sign with a cruel smile, the leader taunts, saying that with that simple object they could sell the shop and even the man's family to pay off the debt. Desperate to protect the people he loves, the merchant humbly kneels and begs to be taken instead of his family. The criminals kick him mercilessly once more, laughing and saying that he should have paid on time and that his old body is worthless. As the leader begins to ramble wickedly about the fate of his children, a mysterious whistling sound begins to echo through the alley, drawing the attention of the gang. One of the criminals looks around angrily and asks loudly, "Who's the meddling bastard whistling over there?" The group shouts, demanding that the intruder appear, but suddenly they all begin to feel a strong and unbearable headache caused by the vibration of the sound. Completely stunned by the invisible pressure, The henchmen try to understand what is happening while the leader angrily shouts for everyone to shut up. The group leader begins to sweat with terror upon realizing that the hidden intruder is an extraordinary master capable of shattering a person's soul with just a whistle. As a sign of respect and fear, he offers a formal greeting and asks aloud if the hidden master has any outstanding business with their group. The three criminals stand tensely on guard as a cold, mysterious fog begins to envelop the entire alley. The leader swallowed hard, his nervousness growing, feeling cold sweat trickle down his neck as that overwhelming presence approached. Trembling and bowing deeply, the henchman implores the hidden master to do him the honor of revealing himself in the darkness. Slowly, a bare foot firmly steps onto the damp ground of the alley, breaking the tense silence that hung over the men. Yeon So-hyun emerges from the shadows, completely enveloped in a terrifying purple aura, his eyes gleaming demonically. He stops right in front of the criminal leader, who freezes in terror at the sight of that intimidating figure up close. With a sadistic grin and sharp teeth showing, the boy remarks that he smelled a delicious aroma coming from that very dark spot. The criminal's eyes widen and he lets out a silent scream of panic upon realizing the truly monstrous nature of the mysterious intruder. In sheer panic, the leader tries to draw his sword and screams in fear, but is easily restrained when the young master grabs his arm with extreme force. With her overwhelming strength, Yeon So-hyun effortlessly begins to crush the man's wrist, causing him to scream in pain and beg her to stop the massacre. The criminal's arm bone shatters under the immense pressure of that firm grip, eliciting new desperate cries of pure agony. The other two henchmen watch the scene completely paralyzed and horrified by the extreme violence suffered by their leader in just a few seconds. Next, Yeon So-hyun grabs the leader by the neck and begins to relentlessly drain his life force while the man screams desperately. With blood splattering on his face, the boy grins maniacally as he savors the stolen life force, murmuring that the taste is incredibly delicious. He drops the criminal's lifeless body to the ground while the dark fog surrounding him begins to pulse even more intensely. Countless ghostly souls and hands begin to appear around him, fueling the forbidden power of the scripture he now possesses. Showing no mercy to the gang of criminals, Yeon So-hyun swiftly advances toward her next target to continue her feast. A massive explosion of dark energy engulfs the entire alley, claiming the lives of the criminals in a matter of seconds and restoring silence. With a sadistic look and a macabre smile, he glances around and notices with satisfaction that there are still two fugitive henchmen left for him to hunt down tonight. Desperate and panicked at the prospect of seeing their companions eliminated, the survivors run screaming in fear that he is a true monster. The surviving criminals continue to flee desperately through the dark streets of the city, terrified of their terrifying pursuer. However, the monstrous, hate-filled shadow of Yeon So-hyun emerges relentlessly and swiftly behind them. One of the fugitives shivers with terror upon realizing that it is absolutely impossible to escape that approaching murderous presence. In a matter of seconds, another fatal blow is delivered in the darkness, splattering fresh blood across the walls of the silent alley. The last surviving henchman watches the brutal scene in utter shock, stammering in terror that it must all be a terrible nightmare. He tries to turn around and run for his life, while the young master's bloodied hand stands out in the dim light of the alley. Desperate cries of agony and pain echo one last time through the alley, before silence reigns once more in the night. The last man desperately bangs on a large locked wooden door, frantically pleading for someone to help him hide. He turns around crying and questions the monster about why it's doing this to them, complaining that there are so many bad people in the world to punish. Yeon So-hyun simply stares at him menacingly under the reddish moonlight of the night, maintaining her maniacal smile and sharp teeth. The boy slowly approaches the terrified man's ear, revealing up close his grin full of sharp teeth. In a dark and relentless voice, the creature ominously whispers that this unfortunate group of criminals is only the beginning of its grand feast. After all the commotion in the city, Yeon So-hyun finally wakes up lying on her back on the cold stone floor of a dark cave. He slowly opens his eyes, feeling a little disoriented and wondering to himself where exactly he is. The boy sits up with effort and rests his hand on his forehead, clearly remembering leaving that inn in Luoyang, but without knowing how he ended up there. Suddenly, strange and mysterious metallic noises begin to echo from the back of the cave, immediately drawing his attention. Looking around, he is confronted with an immense underground corridor, surrounded by dozens of iron coffins lined up in a terrifying fashion. He examines the place with great seriousness and attention, deducing that he has ended up inside an ancient and mysterious underground tomb. Suddenly, a skeletal figure with glowing red eyes emerges from the shadows in a terrifying way right in front of you. He observes those cadaverous figures that seem so well preserved that they could attack at any moment, wondering how they were created. A mysterious voice from the depths of the tomb praises the boy's immense composure, calling him the true heir to the legendary scripture of Jim Jinshin. From the shadows of the place emerges the figure of an old hooded man with cracked skin and bright red eyes, floating calmly in a meditative pose. Yeon So-hyun walks calmly forward and mocks the old man's hoarse voice, commenting that it sounds like mold is growing in his throat. The old man lets out a sinister, hoarse laugh, praising the young master for still being as sharp-tongued as ever. The boy retorts sarcastically, asking if poor oral hygiene is the real reason all his teeth have rotted like that. Instead of getting angry at the insult, the elder comments that he likes him more and more and celebrates the fact that the forbidden scripture has finally found a suitable host. The young master replies with utter arrogance and confidence that the demonic artifact has simply found its one and only rightful master. The old man burst into hysterical laughter, admitting with satisfaction that he had indeed never met anyone with such audacity and striking personality. Next, he expresses curiosity about how much a young man like himself truly understands about the profound secrets behind that legendary scripture. Yeon So-hyun accurately explains that the artifact is an ancient item with enough power to bend time and send him back to his own past. He adds that it is a document that defies the law of cause and effect, having been crafted with the blood, skin, and tendons of 3 immortals. He admits that these are the only details he knows, and making a formal bow, asks the elder to teach him more about the subject. The old man is very surprised by the humble attitude and reveals that normally the new heirs to the deed tend to show only one of 2 reactions at that moment. He explains that most succumb to blind arrogance, believing that power was all they lacked, or fall into such violent madness that any conversation becomes impossible. Hearing the elder say that he is different from all the previous ones, Yeon So-hyun finds it curious how quickly the man changed his tone of voice to a respectful one. The old man then confesses with complete sincerity that not even he himself can fully comprehend all the mysteries contained in that forbidden writing. He comments that, despite rumors that ancient, maddened immortals created it to contain the darkness, the artifact's true origin remains an enigma. The elder surprisingly reveals that the reason he knows so much is because he himself was once one of those legendary immortal beings in the distant past. He immediately corrects himself bitterly, emphasizing that he only used to bear that divine title in the past. He deeply regrets having fallen so low as to become that decrepit and insignificant figure, receiving only Yeon So-hyun's silence in response. The elder recounts that he spent entire ages studying the demonic artifact, but that each answer he found only generated endless new questions in his mind. With eyes gleaming intensely with panic, he admits that despite the difficulties, it was simply impossible to stop investigating that ancient secret. Yeon So-hyun retorts, saying that she still doesn't understand how a former immortal who spent so much time studying the subject still doesn't know the definitive answers about the book. The old man explains that countless powerful warriors tried to master that power in the past, but all ended up being devoured by the scripture itself in the end. However, he points directly to the young master and states with a smile that he can see in him a true and unique spark of hope. The old man states that the young man has already completed the initiation rite necessary to begin that long journey, causing Yeon So-hyun to question the true meaning of his words. With a sinister look, the old man responds by asking if the boy doesn't remember devouring those corrupted souls recently in the city. The young master's eyes widened as he realized the terrible and shocking truth behind that frightening revelation from his mind. He suddenly remembers his monstrous, bloodied form devouring the criminals of Loyang Alley without any pity or hesitation. The image of him transformed into a true soul-hunting monster, shrouded in dark mist, returns with full force to his mind. The elder explains that the more wicked men Yeon So-hyun consumes, the more of the true power of the forbidden scripture he will be able to awaken. Yeon So-hyun realizes, with some astonishment, that her insatiable hunger has finally vanished, reflecting on how bizarre it is to feel satiated through such a heinous act. The hooded old man claims that this devouring hunger is the first and last demand that the demonic artifact makes of its direct heir. He points out that the inheritance is called a scripture that defies the heavens precisely because its purpose is to devour all human wickedness, acting in place of an apathetic and negligent heaven. The elder clarifies that the act of devouring should not be taken literally, since those ghostly hands are hungry specters that help him absorb the essence of the wicked through their dark energy. In fact, hungry ghosts are responsible for draining the vitality and permanently imprisoning the souls of their chosen victims. Suddenly, a strong tremor begins to shake the entire underground cave, causing small debris to fall from the stone ceiling. The former immortal lets out a hoarse, mysterious laugh, calmly commenting that their time in that spiritual plane is coming to an end. He bids farewell, promising they will meet again very soon, and wishing the young master a good hunt in the real world. With a loud crash that echoes through the cave, the subterranean tomb begins to crumble and disappear completely before the heir's eyes. Back in the waking world, the bright morning sun beautifully illuminates the top of the original awakening pavilion. Outside Yeon So-hyun's quarters, Jung-ah respectfully informs her that she has prepared tea and snacks, reflecting on the discoveries she has made since arriving there. The young man inside orders her to simply leave everything on the table, and the maid promptly and very politely obeys. She recalls her conclusions, listing as the first point the fact that the main pavilion where he sleeps is extremely dangerous because it contains valuable martial arts manuals scattered on the floor. She knows very well that if any ordinary person dared to read the contents of those secret scriptures, they would disappear off the face of the earth in an instant without a trace. As a second point of strangeness, she highlights the heir's eccentric habits, which break all protocol by cheerfully helping her in the kitchen early in the morning. His behavior of personally picking vegetables and insisting on sharing the dining table with his servants breaks all the strict rules of the high nobility. Despite the enormous difference in social status between the two, the young master seems bizarrely accustomed to performing those simple household tasks. Seated before the delicious dishes, she shyly asks if he really wants her to share the same dinner table with him again that day. With a warm smile on her face, Yeon So-hyun replies that this closeness will not just be for today, but from now on and forever. She tries to insist that a servant should never eat before her master, but he immediately cuts her off, politely asking her to simply eat without worry. Finally, she focuses on her third and most intriguing conclusion regarding the unusual behavior of her new master. She admits to herself, somewhat frustrated and awkwardly, that Yeon So-hyun clearly shows no romantic interest in her whatsoever. This fact confuses her greatly, since due to her stunning beauty she was known as the Ice Flower, attracting and disturbing the gaze of everyone around her. The other two heirs of the clan also coveted her obsessively, being known for their terrible history of making all the women who fell into their clutches disappear without a trace. Because of this, she was terrified of their harassment and viewed with immense relief Yeon So-hyun's complete indifference, understanding that mission as a true matter of survival. During these thoughts, she hears heavy footsteps approaching in the hallway and wonders if accepting that mission in the pavilion was really the right choice. The guard with the red bandana bursts into the hall, apologizing for the intrusion and explaining that he has an urgent report to deliver to the young man. Jung-ah assumes a protective stance and firmly reprimands the guard, questioning how he dares to invade the premises so rudely while the master is eating. The man becomes embarrassed and explains that an important visitor has just arrived at the entrance, prompting the maid to immediately ask who this person is. The guard hesitantly reveals that they are warriors from the feared Samjeol Guard, coming directly from the clan's main house. Jung-ah is completely shocked and apprehensive upon hearing that name, knowing that the Samjeol Guard is the personal armed force of the fearsome third young master. The guard nervously adds that the warriors are shouting demands for the immediate delivery of the new maid who arrived at the pavilion the previous day. She immediately recalls the head butler's warning about the obsessive struggle between the second and third heirs for control over her destiny. With considerable haughtiness, she questions how mere guards dare to order and command the properties of the principal heir, while the messenger says he tried to use the same argument without success. He justifies this by saying that they claim to be following direct orders from the third young master, making it impossible for a simple sentry to rudely refuse the request. In a very calm manner, Yeon So-hyun gently taps her chopsticks on the table and orders the young woman to go speak with the visitors outside. Jung-ah's golden eyes widened in pure panic upon hearing that rejection order from his protector. Keeping his focus on his reading, he remarks indifferently that they are making too much noise outside and that she should just go and listen to what they want, making her nod in agreement. She becomes extremely indignant and outraged by the fact that the third heir is ignoring all formal protocols just to try and take her by force in such an arrogant manner. As she leaves the room, assuring everyone she'll be back soon, Yeon So-yeon suddenly tells the guard with the red bandana to wait a moment before leaving. The sentry is surprised and points confusedly to his own face, confirming whether the call was really for him. With a serious look, the young master asks who gave him permission to enter his private quarters in that manner, leaving the man stammering with nervousness. When confronted about entering knowing it was prohibited, the guard tries to explain that security at the main gate became confused after recent layoffs. Yeon So-yeon coldly and ironically asks if the absence of people authorizes him to invade the premises as he pleases, making the man tremble with fear. The sentry immediately kneels and begs for forgiveness with his hands clasped, solemnly swearing that this misconduct will never happen again. The heir decides to forgive him this time, but imposes as punishment that from that moment on he be the new permanent sentinel in charge of guarding the main gate indefinitely. The man is completely shocked and coldly sweats at the excessive severity of the sudden and harsh punishment he has just received. Keeping her eyes fixed on her notes, Yeon So-yeon curtly informs him that his access is now restricted to common areas only, forbidding him from entering the private quarters. He gives a cynical and frightening smile as he adds that, if the guard doesn't like the punishment, he's completely free to try to act behind his back again. With no other viable choice, the guard swallows his pride and accepts the order, inwardly lamenting having been demoted to a mere doorman of the pavilion. Yeon So-yeon coldly asks why he's still standing there, causing the man to hastily retreat, trembling with panic from her presence. Outside the pavilion, the arrogant warrior sent by the main house loudly complains about the rude reception he is receiving at the entrance. Young-ah approaches calmly and gives a formal bow, introducing herself in an extremely polite manner to the clan's visitors. The warrior, who is a direct subordinate of the third young master, curtly orders her to guide him inside so that he can speak with Yeon So-yeon at once. Undeterred, the maid earnestly informs him that the young master has not authorized anyone's entry and that he must discuss his affairs right there in the courtyard. Furious at the girl's audacity, the warrior places his hand on the hilt of his sword and calls her mad with deep disdain. He draws his weapon violently, shouting angrily about how a mere servant dares to challenge his clan's authority in that way. Young-ah remains motionless, her gaze sharp, staring intently at the man's blade with complete seriousness. In the next millisecond, a colossal metallic clang of swords suddenly echoes throughout the silent courtyard. To everyone's surprise, the red-banded guard appears like a bolt of lightning and blocks the warrior's violent attack with his own blade. He positions himself in front of Young-ah, warning the intruder that this is a restricted area and that no one is allowed to pass through without special authorization. The warrior from the main house becomes extremely enraged by the interference and shouts at the guard to get out of his way immediately. With an intimidating aura and gleaming eyes, the bandana-clad guard gives a final, definitive warning to the intruder. Retreat before it's too late. Feeling the immense pressure from his opponent, the warrior begins to sweat with nervousness and realizes he has made a serious misjudgment of the man's strength. While the guard seethes with rage over his demotion, the invading warrior realizes with horror that he is facing an extremely dangerous warrior. Trying to hide his panic, the warrior clears his throat and takes a step back, claiming that his only interest there is to speak directly with the maid. He addresses Young-ah sharply, ordering her to accompany him immediately to present herself to the third young master. With utter disdain and pride, the girl replies firmly that the fate of her steps is not something for the third young master to decide. The man grinds his teeth in anger at the insolence, but Young-ah coldly ignores him and retorts that he is merely following the clan's formal rules. Annoyed at not getting what he wanted, the warrior threatens to see if she'll maintain that arrogant attitude in front of his master. He turns his back to the pavilion and leaves the place, grumbling that the third young master hates using anything that has belonged to other nobles. As he leaves, the warrior intentionally bumps into another officer who was arriving in the courtyard, and the two exchange whispers of disdain. The new visitor, dressed in elegant butler attire, observes the pair in the courtyard and cynically comments on their watchman's work. The newcomer formally introduces himself as the butler, in charge of all the domains of the second young master of the sword family. Holding an envelope imposingly, he arrogantly orders the young maid to guide him immediately to Yeon So-yeon. Maintaining his impeccable defensive posture, Young-ah earnestly informs the young master that he is not receiving visitors at the moment. The butler of the second young master questions with suspicion whether that restriction is real, emphasizing that he needs to personally deliver an urgent letter. The guard with the red bandana intervenes firmly and confirms the information, suggesting that the man simply leave the letter with the maid and withdraw. With no other viable alternative, the butler hands the envelope to Young-ah, giving him a rather intimidating warning look. He approaches and whispers menacingly close to her face, assuring her that no matter what she plans, her fate will remain in the hands of the second young master. As the butler proudly withdraws, the guard watches him silently, knowing full well that the principal heir never actually forbade visits from anyone. Seeing the girl's confusion, the bandana-wearing guard sincerely admits that he has absolutely no sympathy or genuine loyalty towards Yeon So-yeon. He reveals that he only helped her because she is the same age as his daughter and questions whether she is acting out of genuine loyalty or simply out of pure survival instinct. The man points out that Yeon So-hyun could have resolved the entire noisy situation with a single word, asking the young woman why she thinks he chose not to intervene. Young-ah is speechless and thoughtful at the question, while the guard quickly bids her farewell and asks her to deliver the letter to the young man as soon as possible. Alone in the courtyard, the young maid begins to reflect deeply on her life and on all the people she felt grateful for since being sold to the clan. She realizes with a certain melancholy that, in truth, she had never stopped to think maturely about the real meaning of being loyal to someone. She reflects that she always acted on the basis of reciprocity, only giving back what she received, and realizes that she was treating Yeon So-yeon under exactly that same shallow logic. Shortly after, Young-ah enters her master's chambers and respectfully extends her hand to deliver the letter left by the butler. Yeon So-yeon receives the envelope indifferently and, with a swift wave of her hand, throws the letter directly into the fireplace without even opening it. Young-ah watches the scene, completely horrified and incredulous, as she sees the important document from the second young master instantly turn to ashes. Maintaining his focus on his reading, he calmly remarks that he has heard everything, while the girl, frightened, insists on knowing whose letter he just burned. She cautiously explains that she believes the letter specifically addressed her transfer and her future within the Sword family. She hesitantly asks him if there really won't be any problem with him having discarded and burned his brother's document without reading its contents. The young man responds with complete indifference and disdain, stating that if the matter were truly urgent, the second young master himself would have come personally. Suddenly, he turns to her with a perceptive look and asks why she didn't read the letter herself if she was so curious, leaving her completely speechless and confused. He repeats the question directly, asking why she didn't open and read the envelope before handing it over if she was so concerned about other people's intentions. Young-ah's eyes widened, pale with terror, and she stammered in horror, questioning how a mere servant could dare to commit such a grave offense against his privacy. With a cynical smile, as if she knows exactly who she's dealing with, Yeon So-yeon politely deflects the conversation and asks her to simply prepare the morning tea. While pouring a warm cup of tea, Young-ah asks if someone as insignificant as herself could also drink with him, receiving a positive response from the young man. She then brings the cup to her lips and takes a sip quite delicately. Yeon So-hyun compliments the wonderful aroma of the drink as the two sit facing each other in the luxurious lounge. Young-ah holds the glass thoughtfully, trying to decipher the real meaning of his question about her not having read the mysterious letter before handing it over. Suddenly, her eyes widen as she remembers a very important detail about the meals they shared. She recalls that the young master always insisted that she eat absolutely everything that was served before he himself took the first bite. Her heart pounding with terror, she realizes that the true intention behind such generosity was to use her as a poison taster. She finally understands that the only reason they prepared and shared meals was because the boy hadn't trusted her at all from the start. The young woman covers her mouth in shock as she faces the harsh reality that he saw her as just another lying and dangerous spy. Startled, Young-ah abruptly stands up from her chair and confesses with her head bowed that she, too, was just another intruder sent to spy on him. Without taking her eyes off her reading, Yeon So-yeon simply lets out a calm murmur, indicating that she already knew all of that. The girl apologizes for the late report and confesses that she made up the excuse that he wouldn't receive visitors just to protect him from those arrogant guards. She bitterly reprimands herself, admitting that she was extremely foolish to try to appear clever when, in fact, she was ignorant about the most important things. The young woman regrets having focused solely on her own survival for so long, acknowledging that her previous job in the waiting room prevented her from learning the true value of serving someone wholeheartedly. At that moment, she falls to her knees on the ground before the young man, her hands clasped in a sign of profound respect and submission. Bent over, Young-ah asks if he would accept her absolute loyalty if she decided to dedicate her entire life and effort solely to him from that moment on. Yeon So-hyun pauses what she's doing for a moment and lets out a thoughtful sigh while staring at her seriously. He then questions whether she would truly be able to maintain this unwavering loyalty, regardless of the dangers that might arise or the dark truths she might discover about him. With her golden eyes gleaming with determination, the girl assures with complete certainty that she is fully capable of fulfilling that promise. The young man changes the subject and asks if she knows anything about his father, prompting her to reply that she heard the great patriarch was bedridden, tending to the family business due to a serious illness. Yeon So-hyun coldly reveals that her father is not ill, but has been in a deep coma for a long time due to a terrible criminal poisoning that left the clan under the control of a corrupt council. With a sharp gaze, he explains that he has always had to prepare his own food since childhood to survive, and asks her if she can imagine how many attempted poisonings he has suffered to this day. Young-ah is completely horrified by the revelation and tremblingly confesses that she doesn't even feel capable of guessing a number in the face of such cruelty. The young master stands up and warns that this terrible conspiracy is only a small sample of all the corruption surrounding his family, asking once more if she still wishes to follow him. Without hesitating for a second, she clasps her hands in her lap and formally begs to be accepted as his humble and faithful servant. Faced with such determination, Yeon So-hyun hands the girl a letter and instructs her to read the last page of the document very carefully. Upon opening the sheet, she begins to read the cold orders stating that if she confessed the truth honestly, she should be treated like a beast of burden, but that the situation would be far worse if she tried to negotiate. The girl trembles with terror upon seeing the gruesome final instruction, which expressly recommends that the young master kill her silently and dispose of her body immediately. A tear rolls down her face as she despairs, realizing that the cruel execution order was written by the head butler, whom she loved like a father. Taking another sip of her tea calmly, Yeon So-hyun asks if she finally understands the real reason he showed her that secret condemnation report. Young-ah quickly wipes away her tears and confirms, her voice choked with emotion, that she perfectly understood her master's message. She ventures to say that the young master wanted to teach her an invaluable lesson about what true loyalty means and in whom she should truly place her trust. The young man gives a wry smile and asserts that blind loyalty is nothing more than absurd madness, questioning how else anyone could explain a father discarding his own daughter in the name of a clan. With overwhelming authority, he stares intently down at her and asks the definitive question. Will she still be willing to uphold her oath if he decides to take her under his protective wing? With flushed cheeks and eyes shining with sincere devotion, she sweetly declares that the decision to accept her rests solely with him, but that her duty will remain to serve him with complete loyalty. Hearing her proclaim that he is her one and only true master, the young master breaks into a beautiful, satisfied smile and approves of that response as excellent. Night falls lazily over the imposing Wangak pavilion under the silent, silvery light of a magnificent full moon. Inside the candlelit rooms, Young-ah begins to reveal her painful past, explaining that her family used to manage an important trading guild led by her beloved father. She fondly remembers the peaceful and happy childhood she shared with her beloved father and her dear older sister. But all that warm harmony, full of smiles, was about to be brutally destroyed by a terrible twist of fate. Young-ah recounts that the merchant guild began experiencing serious financial difficulties and that their only desperate option was to resort to a dangerous and abusive illegal loan. She explains with hatred in her eyes that these ruthless loan sharks first lure victims with low interest rates, only to later charge astronomical and abusive amounts that are more than 10 times the original value. As desperate attempts to revive the business tragically failed due to sheer bad luck, debts piled up, and the two sisters ended up being sold to influential families as payment for the outstanding balance. Yeon So-hyun finds it strange that such a young girl could help manage an entire merchant guild, but the maid proudly assures her that her sister has always been a true prodigy since she was very little. She proudly reveals that her sister managed to re-establish herself in the big city of Luoyang, becoming an extremely strong and respected woman. Currently, she operates prominently in the shadows of the city's underworld as one of the most sought-after and influential informants in the region. Yeon So-hyun takes that information seriously, finding the existence of such a skilled informant extremely useful for her future revenge plans. The maid dramatically recounts how she recently received a mysterious letter from her sister revealing that she had finally located the true culprit behind their clan's ruin. With an expression full of hatred and utter resentment, she vows that she will never be able to forget the disgusting features and colossal physique of that cruel loan shark known by the codename Geumjil. Upon hearing that specific name, Yeon So-hyun almost choked on her tea in surprise, while the girl confirmed that that infamous nickname was the only way everyone referred to the man. Yeon So-hyun confirms whether her sister really works as an informant, receiving a shy yes from the girl. The young master takes another sip of his tea and suggests that, since it has been a long time since the two last met, they should visit her sister the following day. Young-ah is extremely happy and surprised by the generous offer, asking if it's really true. He smiles gently and says they can stay there for about half a day, encouraging her to chat and catch up as much as she likes. The following morning, the young woman appears fully dressed and announces that she is completely ready for the trip. Yeon So-hyun thoughtfully looks her up and down and wonders if that's really the best outfit she owns, leaving her worried. He remarks that the simple attire is unsuitable for a servant accompanying the clan's main heir, and then shouts for the gate guard. The guard with the red bandana approaches, grumbling that being called a doorman is a bit humiliating, but is brutally cut off by the young master who tells him to shut up. The young man orders him to go immediately to the inner courtyard and demand that the administrators deliver the finest quality women's clothing to the maid. The guard grinds his teeth and becomes furious at the principal heir's audacity, questioning what he has just ordered. Yeon So-hyun approaches and whispers menacingly that if he doesn't run right now, he'll be demoted to the position of manure collector for the pavilion. Completely terrified by the humiliation of carrying dirt, the man shouts that he will be back in a flash and runs off in despair. Young-ah is impressed by the man's incredible speed, while the guard himself runs off cursing, having dedicated his entire life to a clan, only to end up serving as a luxury messenger. He moves like lightning, consumed by the fury of being ridiculed by an heir he considers useless, consoling himself with the idea that his transfer request has already been sent and that he only needs to endure a little longer. Returning frustrated and empty-handed, the guard angrily reports that the administrators refuse to hand over any clothing, claiming that the young master should know very well the reason for the refusal. Although the boy ponders the affront from his relatives, Young-ah timidly suggests that they simply leave before it's too late. The young master suddenly put his hand inside the sleeve of his robe, commenting that he had forgotten a very important detail because he hadn't used it for a long time. Without any warning, he strikes the guard in the forehead with a heavy gleaming block of pure gold, eliciting a cry of pain and shock. The guard's eyes widen as he recognizes the golden object, and Yeon So-hyun orders him to return to the inner courtyard and simply show it to him in order to get what he wants. As the man hesitates and tries to question him, the young master mercilessly kicks him out, ordering him to stop talking and run away once and for all. Young-ah watches the scene completely paralyzed and tremulously asks if that golden object is really what she's imagining. Displaying the shiny block in his hands with complete nonchalance, he confirms that it is indeed the official seal of the clan patriarch. The girl is in complete shock to see the golden seal of the Sword family in his possession and questions how he obtained something so sacred. With a mischievous grin, the boy argues that given his father's current vegetative state, no one but the principal heir would have the right to keep that artifact. This mystical seal of solid gold was a gift bestowed by the previous emperor himself to symbolize the holder of absolute authority over the entire clan. She questions why he would use such a valuable national treasure just to buy servants' clothes, but the young man replies, laughing, that he always used the stamp for silly things like buying paper and books because people never contributed otherwise. Young-ah is completely incredulous and speechless at such a nonchalant justification for the use of an imperial relic. At that moment, a beautiful woman named Woo Hwayeon appears in the courtyard, accompanied by several maids, and offers a formal greeting, inviting the young man to come and meet them. She mentions that she personally brought all the requested items, and Yeon So-hyun sarcastically replies that everything would have been much easier if they had collaborated from the beginning. Even trembling with anger at having been forced to obey, The woman maintains a forced smile and bids a cordial farewell before leaving. In the pavilion's courtyard, a long line of maids bows respectfully before dozens of boxes filled with luxurious fabrics and fine silk garments. Gazing in fascination at all that glittering wealth, Young-ah hesitates and remarks that those fine robes of high nobility are unbecoming of her humble position as a maid. The young master approaches her seriously and assures her that, now that she serves his pavilion and his plans have begun to move forward, she will need to wear even better attire in the future. Hearing those words of encouragement that give her life a new purpose, the young woman clenches her hands tightly to contain her emotion. She bows sincerely and responds with absolute and profound loyalty to her new master. The two then set off towards Luoyang, an ancient metropolis that has established itself as the heart of the continent's commerce and culture, home to millions of inhabitants. On the bustling streets of the big city, residents begin to whisper excitedly and point curiously at a group of travelers who have just arrived. Young-ah's stunning beauty, clad in those fine silks, draws admiring glances from all the men around her, who can't help but shower her with compliments and fight over her attention. However, passers-by quickly recoil in fright upon noticing that the security guard escorting her bears the coat of arms and wears the robes of the feared Luoyang sword family. Walking close behind the couple with a frown, the guard in the red bandana grumbles about how absurd it is for the young master to be walking around so unprotected. He snorts irritably, remembering how much he trained his sword skills only to end up babysitting maids, when suddenly Yeon So-yeon announces she needs to attend to a personal matter and walks away. The guard becomes desperate and shouts indignantly as he watches the young man walk away, questioning whether he really intends to leave his own bodyguard behind on a dangerous street. Yeon So-yeon calmly replies that the guard's sole duty from now on is to protect Young-ah from any danger, ignoring the man's desperate protests. The guard blinks for a brief moment and gets a terrible fright when he realizes that the young master has simply vanished into thin air without leaving the slightest trace. Angry at his own incompetence, the guard quickly informs the maid that she will need to go alone for the time being, as he needs to find his master immediately. Young-ah assures him with a gentle smile that she can take very good care of herself and asks him to focus on protecting the young master, admitting that she feels nothing bad could possibly happen to the boy. The bodyguard leaps swiftly into the air, mentally cursing the lead heir's terrifying speed and determined to find him at all costs. He runs and leaps skillfully across the rooftops of the city, using all his agility as a seasoned warrior to watch over the area from above. The man stops on top of a large house and observes the horizon in confusion, unable to understand how the boy disappeared so suddenly, even with his 5 martial senses fully activated. Completely intrigued and sweating with nervousness, he wonders in frustration about the true and secret identity of that enigmatic young master. Next, Yeon So-hyun appears in front of an old wooden gate in a more secluded corner of the city. The gate opens slowly with a soft creak, revealing the dim light of a mysterious property. A man emerges from within the building, enveloped in a cold mist, and greets the young master, saying that he has finally arrived. The old craftsman humbly invites him in, commenting that his home is quite simple. However, upon crossing the entrance, the man is horrified to see that the inner courtyard of his house has been completely vandalized and destroyed. With his face bruised and covered in blood, the craftsman angrily deduces that the Black Bones faction's henchmen have also invaded his home. Overcome with despair, he runs towards the bedrooms shouting for his wife and asking if she and the children are all right. His wife and children run to him, crying with relief, while she is horrified to notice the serious injuries on her husband's face. The whole family comes together in a tight, emotional embrace, weeping loudly for having survived that terrible nightmare. Yeon So-hyun simply observes that moving scene in absolute silence, maintaining a serious and thoughtful expression. Suddenly, the woman notices the young master of finery and is startled by his imposing posture. Thinking he's just another ruthless debt collector, she falls to her knees, begging for mercy and vowing to pay every cent if they spare their lives. The children also cry in terror and join their mother's pleas, begging the nobleman not to hurt their father. The craftsman quickly intervenes and calms his wife, revealing that the mysterious young man is actually the hero who saved his life in the alley. The woman is extremely surprised by the revelation and wipes away tears of shame for having misjudged her husband's savior. She then bows very deeply as a sign of extreme gratitude for him having brought her companion back alive. Yeon So-yeon calmly accepts the family's thanks, maintaining her enigmatic silence while the children also bow. The craftsman extends his hand in a friendly manner and insists that the young man at least agree to come inside and have a cup of tea as thanks for his help. The young man gladly accepts the invitation, saying he will accept their warm hospitality for a brief moment before leaving. While pouring the drink into a simple cup, the man apologizes in advance, claiming that those tea leaves are of the cheapest quality available on the market. Yeon takes a sip of the drink and sincerely praises the taste, assuring everyone that the aroma of the tea is excellent. During their conversation at the table, the craftsman laments not knowing how to repay such kindness. But the young master says he needs nothing and changes the subject, asking about the Black Bones faction that destroyed his house. The man confirms with regret that those loan sharks worked for the dreaded Black Bones faction, a wicked organization led by Gumju, the daughter of an infamous man named Gumjil. He explains that this criminal group runs everything from loan sharking schemes to illegal gambling dens, controlling absolutely everything that generates easy money in the city. Yeon questions him about why he frequented one of those dangerous gambling houses, and the craftsman bitterly reveals that he was lured into one of their traps. He explains that the law limits loan interest rates, so criminals force debtors to gamble in order to artificially inflate their debts, ironically noting that he and his own father helped create this same protective law in the past. Thoughtfully, Yeon holds her cup and asks if the man has any other relevant information about the whereabouts of Gumjil or her daughter Gumju. The craftsman lowers his head sadly and admits that ordinary people like them would hardly have access to the deepest secrets of that criminal leadership. Yeon closes her eyes understandingly and says that she perfectly understands the delicate situation they are in. He then gets up from the table, thanking them for the warm tea, and says he needs to get back on his way. The craftsman tries to stop him, saying he can't just leave like that, and begs for his name so they can return the favor someday. But the boy simply tells them not to worry about it. The whole family comes together and begs him to wait a moment, arguing that even though they are humble commoners, they would not be so shameless as to let their savior leave empty-handed. The young master's eyes narrowed slightly as he noticed a large number of objects scattered on the floor in a corner of the room. In the damp corner of the room, dozens of handcrafted theater masks are scattered on the floor, one of them glowing mysteriously and unusually. He walks silently toward that pile of masks, feeling a very unique energy emanating from that particular object. He picks up the white mask from the floor and announces that he will accept that simple item as payment, officially settling any debt of gratitude between them. The craftsman's eyes widened, and he paled with shock upon seeing the heir choose precisely that specific piece from his collection. The man confesses earnestly that, in fact, he was not the one who sculpted that mysterious white mask the boy is holding. He points out that the object doesn't even have slits for the eyes or nose, and its surface has a completely unfinished and rustic texture. The craftsman reveals that this was the last piece his late father obsessively sculpted after losing his mind in his final years, adding that he intended to destroy it as it was considered a cursed amulet. Ignoring the ominous warning, Yeon meticulously examines the piece and questions why her deceased father would have gone to such lengths to create such an object before he died. The man shrugs dejectedly, arguing that the actions of someone who had already lost their sanity would hardly have any logical explanation. With an enigmatic and insightful smile on his lips, the young master asks if some unusual event could have caused this sudden madness in the deceased craftsman. The man is extremely shocked by his insight and ends up revealing that he had an older brother who possessed an extraordinary talent for the art of sculpture. He recalls that his brother ended up being unjustly accused of a serious crime and that their father, in despair, tried to use his influential contacts with an inspector in Luoyang to free him. However, the corrupt officer demanded an exorbitant bribe to release the young man, forcing the humble family to resort to loan sharking with the Black Bones faction to obtain the money. But despite having paid absolutely everything that was demanded, the only return the family received was the cold, lifeless corpse of their older brother. He recalls the overwhelming pain of seeing his father cry over his son's body, later discovering that the corrupt inspector himself had been the executioner responsible for killing the boy inside the prison. Through clenched teeth filled with pure hatred, he recounts that the tragedy was made even worse by the discovery that his brother was killed simply because several high-ranking officers had made a macabre bet using their personal treasures. He reveals that one of those cruel nobles used one of the masterpieces sculpted by his late father to win that futile power struggle, making Yeon wonder what happened after that. He explains that the loser of the bet became furious, and since he couldn't punish his father directly, decided to incriminate his older brother who would inherit the workshop, causing his father to protest daily at the town hall. Then, the man kneels as he recalls the moment when he desperately pleaded with his creditors, promising to repay every coin if they spared his limbs. He recalls the painful cries of the children begging the moneylenders to spare their father's life. The craftsman calms his panicked wife and explains that the young nobleman before them was the one who saved his life from the wrath of the tax collectors. He sadly recounts that after that humiliation, his father locked himself in the workshop and was never seen alive again by any of them. Holding the unfinished white piece, Yeon So-hyun questions whether the man still hasn't grasped the true meaning behind that mask. The craftsman kneels deeply and begs the young master to enlighten him, admitting that he has never been able to decipher his father's last work. The boy picks up the rustic amulet and explains that it was absolutely impossible for that mask to have a delicate or perfect finish. He recalls that the old master had already gone completely mad, ceasing to eat while salivating and delirious in his final agony. Without his hands, which had been crushed, the old man carved the wood using only his toes, bathing the tool in his own blood. The only force keeping that agonizing body standing was a deep and indescribable hatred for the injustice of the world. At the exact second the last carving of the mask was finished, the old craftsman breathed his last. And so it was, amidst blood and extreme pain, that one of the most cursed artifacts in the entire region was born. The object ended up absorbing all the fury and resentment of that family, destroyed by the greed and corruption of the nobles. Yeon So-hyun realizes that the resentful soul inhabiting the mask was the true beacon that guided him directly to that workshop. Next, a strong purple energy envelops the boy as he decides to put the white mask on his own face. Meanwhile, the craftsman's wife falls asleep peacefully on the wooden floor of the residence. He realizes with a certain melancholy that only now has that troubled soul finally managed to find the spiritual peace it so desperately sought. The young man deduces that the old craftsman did not stop carving eyes due to physical incapacity, but rather due to a completely conscious choice. The boy lets out a sinister laugh beneath his wooden disguise as he uncovers the terrible and ironic message left by the craftsman. He understands that the old man simply could no longer bear to open his eyes and contemplate the decay and injustice of that filthy world. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to an extremely dark and dangerous alley located deep within the city of Luoyang. Inside one of the shacks, the rhythmic sound of tattoo needles working on human skin echoes through the silent environment. The tattoo artist mocks the immense brute in front of him, commenting that he has just added another death skull to his muscular body. With a disgusting grin, the man announces that he has finished the drawing and asks if the client wishes to continue with the skin torture sessions. With a tense mouth, the blindfolded man sharply orders the tattoo artist to stop working for the time being and leave them alone in the room. In the next millisecond, the large wooden door of the place explodes into 1,000 pieces with a deafening bang. Several masked and armed assassins violently storm the premises, surrounding the brute on all sides. Instead of being startled by the invasion, the man lets out a mocking laugh and whispers that he had been expecting that attack for a long time. One of the masked invaders advances swiftly and delivers a deadly sword blow toward the target's neck. The giant merely grins sadistically and maniacally, his eye glowing with a murderous crimson energy. With a monstrous right hook, he strikes the masked intruder squarely in the face, who lets out a groan of pain as his teeth are shattered. The attacker's body is brutally thrown against the wooden walls under the sadistic gaze of the giant. The force of the impact is so absurd that it breaks several of the opponent's bones at once amidst the dust. He smashes the wooden floor with his clenched fists, generating a shockwave that destabilizes the other assassins in the room. The brute violently spins his torso and hurls yet another opponent against the ceiling of the establishment. He walks heavily over the wreckage, while the remaining enemies begin to tremble in terror at the overwhelming difference in power. Even when an assassin tries to surprise him by leaping from above with his sharp blade, the giant doesn't even flinch. With a single, incredibly fast punch engulfed in red flames, he instantly annihilates the aerial invader's threat. All the masked invaders end up fallen and dead in pools of blood, while the brute laughs loudly at the easy massacre. Standing atop the piles of corpses, the giant taunts his dead enemies, saying that weak worms could never hide the gleam of their blades before a true warrior. He turns to the trembling tattoo artist and jokes that he'll need to add 4 more skulls to his body after that night of fun. At that moment, an even more imposing man appears in the doorway, carrying a huge wooden beam, and mocks the mess his younger brother has just made. The youngest brother celebrates the arrival of his older brother and explains that he was just having a little fun, prompting the newcomer to reveal that he heard an extremely bizarre rumor coming from the lower-ranking henchman. The younger brother narrows his eyes, reddened with curiosity, and asks sharply what that mysterious rumor is all about. The elder remembers the shopkeeper whose sign was confiscated in the past and reveals that the man's shop has returned to normal operation, as if nothing had happened. The youngest son is surprised, thinking the shopkeeper dared to challenge them, but his brother denies it, explaining that the surveillance thugs were eliminated by a pale, student-like young man who was protecting the place. The giant narrowed his eyes with extreme distrust, trying to imagine what kind of warrior with the appearance of a student would dare cross paths with their band. He grinds his teeth furiously, questioning who the unfortunate, audacious person was who dared to reopen a business that had been personally confiscated by Mr. Gumjil. Determined to settle that insolence with their own hands, the two monstrous brothers march side by side through the sunlit streets of the great city of Luoyang. The two monstrous brothers finally arrive at the entrance of Luoyang's mask shop. Looking inside the establishment, they find Yeon So-hyun sitting calmly behind a table and wonder if he is the student they're talking about. The older brother remarks that the boy looks incredibly young and wonders if he might simply be the disciple of some hidden master. Completely ignoring their approach, the young master continues sculpting a small Buddha statue with great focus. Determined to put an end to the doubts, the younger brother takes an imposing step inside and suggests that they ask the boy directly. With a sadistic, mocking expression, the brute demands to know the whereabouts of the former mask maker who used to work there. Upon lifting her face, Yeon So-hyun reveals that she is wearing the unfinished and cursed white mask of the craftsman. The giant instinctively recoiled with a shiver and cursed angrily for having been startled by the macabre appearance of that wooden object. The older brother takes the lead at the table and orders the boy in a threatening tone to answer their questions immediately. Maintaining an eerie calm beneath her white mask, Yeon So-hyun slowly turns her face toward the invaders. He gently places the sculpted statue on the tabletop before beginning to speak. Slightly lifting the side of his mask with a sadistic smile and eyes gleaming purple, he asks if his brothers know the true divine face of Avalokitesvara. The two giants exchange confused glances and disdainfully question what kind of nonsensical drivel the student is babbling. Yeon So-hyun calmly stands up, holding the wooden statue, and remarks that it really makes no sense to discuss the ways of the Buddha with insignificant worms like them. With firm, silent steps, the young man simply walks between the two giants without showing the slightest sign of fear. Furious at such arrogance and indifference, the brothers grit their teeth and decide that the best option will be to beat him until they get the answers. The youngest son strides heavily toward the back of the store, grumbling that the little guy isn't even worth the effort of one of his monstrous punches. However, upon looking at the display shelves, the brute suddenly stops walking and lets out a murmur of utter bewilderment. He perfectly remembers the henchmen reporting that they completely destroyed the place and looted everything of value inside. But upon seeing all the decorations and masks perfectly intact, the two brothers begin to seriously suspect that some kind of black magic is at work in the establishment. Determined to find the boy, the younger brother opens a door to the inner rooms, asking if the student might have hidden inside. He is greeted by a dense, terrifying purple fog that emanates sounds of frightening demonic laughter and echoes through the dark corridor. The brute recoiled, pale, as he watched dozens of ghostly dark hands begin to emerge from the damp floor of the residence. Overcome by an absolute panic he had never felt before, he lets out a scream of terror upon realizing the gravity of that supernatural trap. A gigantic, spectral, and shadowy hand rapidly emerges from the darkness and grabs him with absurdly immense force. The youngest child screams in pain and despair as he is lifted off the ground by the neck, feeling his life force being violently drained. He desperately tries to fight to break free, but the suffocating grip prevents any physical reaction from the warrior. With a brutal throw, the giant's massive body is violently hurled back into the main trading hall. Seeing his brother thrown like that, the older one quickly steps forward with clenched fists to defend him. However, the youngest child continues screaming in agony as he is dragged back into the darkness of that cursed corridor. As he tries to take a step forward, the older brother is also surprised to have his heel firmly grasped by one of the shadowy hands. The youngest child let out a final, desperate cry for help as he was completely engulfed by the terrible purple fog that dominated the rooms. He tries to dig his nails into the wooden floor in a last futile attempt at resistance, leaving deep marks of despair in the floor. The brute begs for help, his eyes wide with terror as he vanishes completely under the influence of demonic power. A deafening scream of pure agony echoes in the deep darkness, before silence reigns once more in that part of the house. Countless, ghostly, smiling faces emerge from the purple mist, celebrating the feast of souls they have just consumed. Dark energy spreads and envelops all the masks displayed on the shelves, which begin to emit malevolent vibrations of satisfaction. One of the handcrafted pieces displays a bizarrely cheerful expression, confirming that the curse of that place was now more alive than ever. Far away, Yun So-hyun appears, sitting calmly in a clearing in the forest, continuing her sculpting work under the sunlight. As he removes small splinters of wood, he admits to himself that he still hasn't fully uncovered the secret he's been searching for. The young man realizes that merely imitating physical form is not enough, and questions what the true divine form he knew in his past life might have been. Satisfied with the final result of the carving, he puts away his tool and calmly announces that the work is complete. He sets the small sacred image on the ground, revealing that the statue was sculpted with a completely smooth, featureless face, exactly like the cursed mask. Standing before a makeshift tomb adorned with masks from his old workshop, the young master wishes that all tormented spirits may finally rest in peace under the twilight. The boy focuses his thoughts on the Black Bones faction and Gyumju, mentally challenging his enemies to continue mocking and humiliating his name for the time being. With a sharp and merciless gaze, he whispers that mockery will be the only futile form of resistance left for those sinners before his vengeance. The narrative travels to the imposing and luxurious Luoyang Pavilion, which rises majestically under the city's blue sky. Inside a luxurious room, Jung-ah's fearless and respected sister comments that the Luoyang sword family is facing a period of absolute political chaos. While having tea with her younger sister, she explains that the power of the rival heirs is growing very rapidly, while the influence of the missing patriarch is considered practically non-existent by the court. With a serious expression and a sharp gaze, the informant reveals that terrible new rumors about a possible internal poisoning have begun to spread strongly behind the scenes of the clan. Jung-ah takes a sip of her tea and dismisses all the rumors as complete nonsense, muttering that it's a very strange conversation for someone who hasn't seen each other for 10 long years. The older sister smiles slightly and teases the younger one, commenting that it seems she hasn't yet managed to win the complete trust of the main heir. Although she realizes this is just a cheap provocation, Jung-ah knows very well that her sister's true objective is to obtain inner secrets of the Sword Clan. She firmly places her cup on the table and retorts that she's not naive enough to fall for her sister's provocations, making it clear that the issue of trust is not up for debate. The youngest daughter argues that the blame for the current political chaos cannot be placed solely on the shoulders of the young master, who in the end is just another heir. She adds irritably that since he hasn't even assumed interim leadership of the clan, it's a huge mistake to hold him responsible for the fate of the Sword family. The one-eyed sister crosses her arms, furious at Jung-ah's audacity in answering her so firmly. Jung-ah's golden eyes widened in utter shock at her older sister's curt reaction. The informant reveals that she was completely incredulous and speechless upon receiving the news that the youngest sister had voluntarily changed her affiliation to serve at the Wangak Pavilion. The youngest sister realizes in her thoughts that if the news arrived yesterday, it means her sister obtained this secret information at the same time as the spies of the other heirs. Holding her lit pipe, the one-eyed woman says she has no idea what kind of plan the youngest daughter has hatched to trust that particular boy. She gives a mocking laugh as she casually questions why her sister chose to serve the clan's infamous swordless one. Her face contorted with fury, Jung-ah approaches and coldly orders her sister never to utter that derogatory title in her presence again. Surprised by the youngest daughter's determination, the informant lowers her voice and respectfully apologizes. She explains that as a professional in the information underworld, she knows perfectly well that the main heir is no ordinary man, but recalls that 10 years have passed since the patriarch went into seclusion. The one-eyed woman warns that, throughout his decade of calm, the young master's rivals have managed to gather colossal armies and forces within the clan. She skeptically questions what the boy could do against such gigantic forces at this point, receiving Jung-ah's firm reply to simply observe what happens next. Suddenly, Jung-ah's golden eye shines brightly as she detects an unexpected disturbance in the environment. A loud bang echoes from outside the tea room, abruptly interrupting the peaceful conversation between the two sisters. The large wooden partition door is violently destroyed amidst a cloud of dust and shards of glass. A horde of armed and truculent thugs storms the premises shouting, ordering the immediate capture of the mistress of the Luoyang pavilion. The informant recoils tensely upon realizing that those invaders belong to the feared and cruel Black Bones faction. Yong'a is shocked to realize that this is completely absurd, since invading a neutral intelligence guild protected by several groups in broad daylight would practically be a suicide mission. One of the mercenaries leaps towards the eye-patch-wearing sister, disgustingly complimenting her beauty and demanding that she accompany them without resistance. A huge, muscular hand lunges forward to grab her, prompting a desperate cry for help from Yong'a. While chaos reigns, the scene shifts back to a bustling street food stall in Luoyang. The guard with the red bandana runs desperately towards Yon So-hyun, shouting questions about where the young master has been all this time. The young man stares at him with an extremely angry look and asks if the security guard really thinks he has the right to yell at his master like that. While the young man calmly enjoys a street food skewer, the guard sits defeated and tries to justify himself by saying he was worried about leaving the maid walking all alone. The master merely offered an enigmatic smile as he mockingly remarked that the young maid would never be in any real danger in those parts. The security guard is completely confused, unable to understand the young man's absurd confidence, while he watches the young man finish eating in a relaxed manner. With a sharp gaze and a sly smile, the main heir simply savors the moment while mentally planning his next steps. Back in the tea room under attack, Yong'a quickly grabs her older sister's metal pipe and warns that she'll need to borrow it to fight. With impressive agility and eyes gleaming gold, the youngest daughter defensively spins the long metal object in the air. With a precise and violent blow, she strikes squarely in the throat of the first brute who approaches her sister. The assailant with the skull tattoo collapses unconscious onto the wooden floor of the meeting room with a muffled thud. The other henchmen of the Black Bones faction stop advancing and are completely stunned to see that unexpected display of strength coming from a simple maid. Maintaining an impeccable guard posture and firmly gripping the metal pipe, Yong'a positions himself in front of the other mercenaries. One of the mercenaries mocks the young woman, warning her in a hostile manner that trying to fight without being a real martial artist is the worst idea she could have. The older sister trembles with worry in her thoughts, agreeing that there is a clear limit to physical strength for those who lack formal internal energy training. Even when clearly outnumbered by the armed giants, the young maid remained steadfast in her defensive position without retreating a single step. Yong'a glances sideways at the informant and calls her seriously to coordinate their survival strategies. Gripping the metal pipe stem tightly, she wonders in a low voice how long she will have to hold off that horde before help arrives. The sister replies that she needs to hold on for a maximum of 15 minutes before the pavilion's emergency security systems are finally activated. The mercenary leader impatiently announces that the time for talking is over and orders his henchmen to begin the merciless massacre. 3 extremely muscular thugs advance at full speed towards the youngest daughter, shouting that she herself brought about her own tragic end. A colossal, violent fist is thrown towards Yong'a's face with a harsh sound that cuts through the air. Through her golden witch eyes, the young woman can see the scene in slow motion, precisely sensing the opponent's breathing and the trajectory of their attack. Thanks to her heightened mystical perception, she nimbly dodges the colossal fist while preparing her counterattack. With a swift movement of the metal pipe, she strikes the attacker squarely in the joints, causing him to let out a groan of pain and shock at that precise response. Next, Yong'a moves quickly and lands another precise blow that sends her opponent staggering in pain. Realizing she's no ordinary girl, the henchmen yell amongst themselves to spare no effort in the fight. She executes a devastating spinning motion that forces the aggressors to retreat amidst shouts of frustration. Another mercenary is brutally struck on the head with the metal pipe under the watchful gaze of his older sister. The one-eyed informant is completely speechless and shocked by her youngest daughter's immense combat prowess. She finds it unbelievable how Yong'a can so easily overpower elite warriors of the faction, even without ever having trained in formal martial arts. The gang leader grinds his teeth in humiliated fury and noisily draws his sword to take control of the fight. He leaps towards the girl, shouting that she will only learn her lesson when she spills blood, while her older sister screams in panic to warn her. The mercenary grins sadistically as he delivers a deadly slash through the air toward the young woman who is caught off guard. The sharp attack cuts through the air violently, but the young woman manages to react in the final millisecond. She executes an impressive sequence of counterattacks that directly target the attacker's vital points. Yunga concludes the sequence by gently touching the mercenary's chest with the tip of the metal pipe. The leader of the invasion collapses backward onto the ground, completely knocked out and breathless. The one-eyed sister asks in astonishment if she trained in fencing in the clan, and the youngest calmly replies that she only learned by observing the others training from afar. The informant replies that she still needs more practice, but remains puzzled trying to understand how someone learns to fight just by watching others train. Suddenly, heavy footsteps begin to echo from outside towards the hall filled with defeated mercenaries. A female, authoritative voice questions what is happening there as she walks imposingly through the destroyed entrance. Yunga's eyes widened as she immediately recognized that unmistakable tone of voice that had just echoed. The beautiful Gyeomju appears accompanied by her bodyguards and laments disdainfully about the incompetence of those she herself trained as elite. She crosses her arms with a wry smile and remarks that the hospitality at that establishment is truly deplorable. With an air of extreme superiority, she curtly orders all her defeated and wounded subordinates to leave immediately. Jung-ah's sister demands to know what her rival thinks she's doing, firmly warning that this intrusion will have severe consequences for the faction. The villain casually ignores the warning and complains that this is not an appropriate way to receive such an important visitor. The informant coldly refutes Gyeomju's excuse about a visit, who merely smiles slightly and mocks the intelligence of the pavilion's owner. Gyeomju cynically argues that if she were truly an enemy, the two sisters would never be standing and completely unharmed at this point. Without any warning, one of the villain's bodyguards launches a swift and extremely aggressive attack against the eye-patch-wearing informant. The speed of the blow is so absurd that the owner of the establishment can't even dodge it completely, being grazed in the face. A trickle of blood runs down the woman's cheek as she stares at her attacker with a serious and unforgiving expression. Gyeomju mockingly praises the fact that her rival didn't even flinch during the violent attack, lamenting that her own henchmen don't possess that same courage. She walks slowly through the hall and reveals that her subordinates have been suffering constant ambushes on the city streets lately. The informant sharply rebuts, suggesting that this is merely the natural price for the aggressive territorial expansion practiced by the criminal faction. Gyeomju confesses that she has a strong feeling that her rival is the true mastermind behind all those mysterious attacks against her men. With a shrewd look, she questions whether the pavilion warden doesn't find it bizarre that they found her precisely when the defenses of the place were unprotected. The villain proudly reveals that she now possesses a new and impeccable source of information that will forever change the balance of power in Luoyang's underworld. The pavilion owner ironically questions whether this new source has actually confirmed the accusations, but Gyeomju denies it, saying that the allied group is infinitely larger. She imposingly places her hand inside her luxurious robes and begins to pull out a very specific object. Displaying a heavy mystical bronze plaque prominently, she proclaims that this is the symbol of the most powerful organization in all the Central Plains. Jung-ah's eyes widen, and he pales as he immediately recognizes the legendary bronze symbol of the Luoyang sword family. Surprised by the maid's reaction, Gyeomju smiles slightly, holding the sign, and directly asks who she really is. Jung-ah simply clenches her teeth in absolute silence, maintaining an extremely tense and worried look in the face of that frightening revelation. Changing the subject in a mocking manner, the villain questions whether the sisters finally understand why she doesn't care about the consequences of her violent acts. Suddenly, Yeon So-hyun appears, leaning calmly against the doorframe, and mockingly asks if she could take a closer look at that bronze object. All the women in the room freeze in utter shock, and Jung-ah exclaims in relief at the sudden arrival of her master. With a beautiful, friendly, and relaxed smile, the main heir happily celebrates the fact that he wasn't too late for the conversation. The guard with the red bandana appears right behind him, completely out of breath and exhausted, grumbling about how absurd it was that they jumped the wall instead of using the main gate of the house. Yeon So-hyun laughs as she replies that climbing the wall is much more stylish and impressive, further irritating her bodyguard with her boss's silly excuse. He walks extremely calmly towards the villainess and, extending his open hand, demands to see the bronze plaque of his family that she was holding. Gyeomju narrows her reddened eyes in indignation and sharply questions whether he really thinks she would hand over such an important object so easily. One of the villain's bodyguards becomes enraged by the intruder's audacity and shouts, demanding to know the true identity of the cheeky invader. Resting her arm amicably on her bodyguard's shoulder, Yeon So-yeon simply smiles and asks if the luxurious outfits they wear don't already perfectly reveal where they come from. The mercenaries are surprised to notice that the companion is a guard from the prestigious Sword Clan, but they try to hide their nervousness by asking if they should be intimidated by that. The security guard in the red bandana simply clenches his teeth in anger, exuding a murderous and imposing aura through the cracks in the floor. Yeon So-hyun playfully warns her enemies that, despite his ordinary clothes, he is a truly extraordinary master. The henchmen begin to laugh loudly at the boy's audacity, mocking the fact that a skinny student would proclaim himself a great warrior. The young master lets out a bored sigh of disapproval and calmly orders his guard to go and retrieve his family's bronze plaque. The security guard readily accepts the order, with a grim look, the cracking of his joints echoing through the silent room. He takes the first sharp step towards the opposing group with an overwhelming firmness that shakes the floorboards. The mercenaries of the Black Bones faction immediately swallow hard as they feel an overwhelming spiritual pressure emanating from the man. With the guard's second long stride, the immense sword on his back begins to vibrate menacingly before the enemies. The henchmen begin to sweat and tremble with fear as they realize that this military force is far beyond their combat capabilities. As he took his third decisive step, a wave of dust and strong wind suddenly spread throughout the tea room. Even the proud Gyumju's eyes widen, and she pales at the overwhelming display of raw military power. With absurd and relentless speed, the guard executes a swift cut that passes within millimeters of the villain's face. The warrior lands heavily on the cracked ground, shattering the invading band's trust once and for all. He kneels with utmost respect before Yeon So-yeon and returns the bronze plaque to its rightful master. Gyumju watches her own trembling hands in utter panic, belatedly recognizing that the boy's bodyguard is a master of extraordinary skill. Yeon So-hyun meticulously examines the mystical bronze tablet in her hands with complete tranquility and curiosity. He confirms with a laugh that the artifact is absolutely original, while Yoonga observes the scene with relief and apprehension at the same time. He explains in detail that the bronze plaque represents a sacred promise of eternal military aid and protection from the clan to any ally in mortal danger. The owner of the establishment wholeheartedly agrees, reinforcing that the object has always been considered the greatest symbol of absolute trust in the Sword family. The young man casually tosses the mystical artifact into the air and remarks that nowadays the clan has reduced that relic to a mere corporate gift for business partners. Holding the bronze plaque with a regained smile, the villain argues that even as a gift, the symbol still grants immunity and protection against the swords of the Luoyang clan. Yeon So-hyun closes her eyes thoughtfully and admits that disregarding that public promise would completely ruin the credibility her clan has built over centuries. With a shrewd, mocking look, the blonde finally puts the pieces together and deduces that the student before her is the famous swordless heir of the family. He opens his eyes slightly and confirms with complete coldness and firmness his true identity as the rightful heir to the clan. Gyumju lets out a hysterical laugh to try and ease the tension, ironically claiming that the previous scare almost ruined her elegant style. The villain rests her hand on her forehead mockingly and questions what a useless and reclusive heir would bring into the midst of that dangerous underworld of the city. She acts arrogantly, asking if the young man now intends to drag the glorious name of the Luoyang sword family through the mud of the market streets. Jung-ah's metal pipe is slammed violently against the tabletop, interrupting the villain's taunting. The youngest daughter refuses to tolerate the mockery and sharply demands that her rival carefully choose her words before daring to speak of her master. The pavilion's mistress also speaks firmly, reminding everyone that regardless of the malicious rumors, he remains the legitimate main heir of the clan. Gyumju turns her back disdainfully and questions whether a weak and alienated boy truly deserves to represent the legendary family of swords in their eyes. The blonde proudly displays her secret alliance, revealing that she has obtained the direct and invaluable support of the right-hand man of the clan's second young master, the true successor to power. She suddenly narrows her bloodshot eyes suspiciously as she focuses her gaze on a specific detail. The faction leader walks slowly towards the youngest daughter and carefully examines her from head to toe. Pointing directly at the young maid's face, Gyumju exclaims in surprise upon realizing that she is the runaway and troublesome servant the second heir spoke so much about. Jung-ah remains motionless and silent under the villain's accusing gaze, maintaining an extremely tense and worried expression. The blonde woman joyfully celebrates the wonderful coincidence of having found the runaway servant on the very morning she received orders to capture her. She mockingly questions her about why she rejected the golden opportunity to become the second young master's concubine, only to end up serving a useless, swordless man. Faced with the villain's cruel mockery suggesting she was merely a toy in the nobleman's hands, Young-ah grits her teeth and firmly orders her not to dare insult her lord. The youngest daughter declares with immense pride that a disgusting criminal of that ilk doesn't even have the dignity to pronounce the name of someone as noble as Yeon So-hyun. Gyeomju laughs ironically at the word noble, acidly reminding him that the young man threw away all his responsibilities as a legitimate heir just to live like a cowardly loner. The maid lowers her gaze, somewhat melancholic at the insults hurled at the young man, but her heart remains steadfast in her unwavering devotion. Ultimately, the pejorative title of swordless was synonymous with cowardice and shame throughout the province, describing the young man as an ungrateful son who had shirked his military duties to the clan. Gyeomju observes the girl's silence with superiority and challenges her to try to defend herself or the honor of that decadent clan if she is able. Young-ah seethes, with rage inside, knowing that the man she chose to serve is by no means the coward everyone portrays him to be, recognizing that any argument there would be futile. For the first time in her life of trials, she experiences an overwhelming feeling of physical powerlessness, lacking the military strength of her own to defend his honor. Suddenly, a firm and extremely comforting hand gently rests on Young-ah's tense shoulder. Yeon So-hyun appears beside her with a warm smile and warns the enemies to retreat, calmly reminding them that she remains her one and only faithful personal servant. Gyeomju turns her back disdainfully and laments that the fun has ended with the arrival of that meddling heir, promising to settle her pending business soon. Young-ah's sister maintains a serious and defiant expression, facing her rivals without showing the slightest sign of backing down. Gyeomju gives a cruel smile and warns that, the next time she returns, not even that mediocre main heir will be able to save them. The informant merely whispers her rival's name with suppressed hatred, while Yeon So-hyun remains impassive by her side. The blonde woman waves mockingly and wishes them to take good care of themselves until the day of the next and inevitable confrontation between the two factions. As soon as the invaders leave, Young-ah begins to tremble with exhaustion and turns pale from the immense physical exertion she made during the fight. Too weak to continue standing, the young woman falls to her knees on the floor and whispers an emotional apology to her master. The older sister rushes to her aid and holds her in her arms in a panic, realizing that the younger one has suddenly fainted. Young-ah remains unconscious and feverish, sweat dripping down his face due to his exhausted energy. Later, she appears lying comfortably on a bed, while the young master carefully checks the girl's pulse under the watchful eyes of everyone. The red-banded security guard clenched his fist in immense fury at seeing mere street criminals so outrageously sully the name of his sword clan. He reflects angrily that if the young master truly possessed the military strength befitting his high position as the rightful heir, things would be very different. The man cursed, saying he would have confiscated the bronze plaque and torn to pieces all the invaders for insulting the clan, bowing to apologize for his aggressive outburst. With a serene and focused gaze, Yeon So-hyun assures that there is nothing to apologize for, as the guard perfectly fulfilled the defensive role entrusted to him. The young man suggests that the bodyguard return immediately to the main clan, warning that the traitor who delivered the bronze object to Gyeomju might consider him an ally. The guard hesitates and tries to argue, reminding him that his official mission, assigned by the family, was to act as his personal security in that pavilion. Yeon So-hyun coldly replies that there is no need for the guard to sacrifice himself for a lord to whom he never swore true sword loyalty. The man lowers his head in shame upon realizing the truth behind the boy's blunt words, and silently apologizes. The young master then hands a sealed envelope to the security guard with an extremely serious expression. He explains that the document is an official order declaring the completion of the temporary escort mission and orders the guard to return permanently to the clan. The security guard accepts the formal dismissal and leaves the room, holding the paper thoughtfully. Walking back down the hallway, the man cursed furiously to himself, admitting that he had never felt so useless and humiliated as he did that day. The informant rushes into the room and asks worriedly if the youngest daughter will be all right, receiving a confused response from Yeon So-hyun. The boy stares at her strangely and recalls that she herself heard that the girl was just sleeping to rest, but his sister still shows a lot of concern. She crosses her arms suspiciously and questions him about why he took so long just to check the youngest daughter's heartbeat. Yeon So-hyun mysteriously averts her gaze and changes the subject directly, asking if she finally brought the detailed report on the secrets of the Black Bones faction. The woman pulls a scroll from her robes, but first demands to know if there is something wrong with Yong-ah, prompting the boy to jokingly say that the youngest daughter suffers from a serious illness. The informant's eyes widen, pale with shock, and she desperately asks what kind of deadly disease could have afflicted her younger sister. Laughing at her despair, the young master explains that excessive tiredness and extreme muscle fatigue are in fact dangerous conditions that can take lives if neglected. The informant sighs, relieved yet irritated by the silly joke, then questions why he's so interested in information about Luo Yang's criminal faction. By meticulously analyzing the data on the scroll, the young man observes that the investigations suggest she herself is plotting an extremely audacious and dangerous plan against the faction. The pavilion's owner retorted sharply, questioning what her personal plans had to do with the affairs of an heir to the Sword Clan. The young man sternly orders her to stop the provocations, but the informant assures him that she is not his servant, and therefore doesn't have to obey any of his formal commands. He points out that Gumju's bronze plaque is authentic and questions whether she, working in the same branch of intelligence, doesn't understand the immense danger of challenging the allied forces of the Luoyang family. Gritting her teeth in anger, she questions him about how someone aware of so much corruption could have stood by silently for so long, prompting the young man to suggest they continue their serious conversation outside the room. The full moon shines majestically in the night sky, bathing the silent rooftops of the pavilion in a silvery and mysterious light. In the outer courtyard, Yeon So-hyun thoughtfully questions her about where the most prosperous and important merchant guild in the entire world might be located. The young master follows up the question by also inquiring about which military clan was the most prestigious and powerful in the Central Plains, highlighting that the obvious answer is his own family. The one-eyed woman rages furiously against the absurdity of a clan of heroes handing over their mystical symbol to protect bloodthirsty criminals while the citizens of Luoyang suffer from famine. She deeply regrets that while that disgusting scum sucked the life and sweat from the humble population, countless other wicked factions multiplied uncontrollably in the city's alleys. The young man stares at her seriously and coldly reveals that the Luoyang clan was by no means passively watching everything unfold, but rather actively used that criminal faction as a tool to control the underworld. The informant is shocked and overcome with indignation, angrily questions what he has been doing useful with all his supposed intellect during all these years of imprisonment. The pavilion warden states without hesitation that, despite Gumju being a disgusting criminal, the harsh, mocking words she uttered about the boy's cowardly and useless behavior were entirely accurate. She glares at him angrily and directly accuses him of simply wasting his great talent from the past by living a cowardly and isolated life, using the clan's rules of seclusion as a cheap excuse. She warns him that he has no right to dictate rules about his guild's investigations while she risks her own life to obtain true justice, while the young man simply begins to silently walk away. Undeterred by the insults, Yeon So-hyun gives a final and definitive warning to stop trying to confront the leader of the Black Bones faction on her own. Watching his silhouette fade into the darkness, she dramatically begins to recount an old story about two orphaned sisters who shared an unbreakable bond of affection. She recounts that the older sister in that story possessed an extraordinary sense of justice and never silently accepted the crimes committed against the inhabitants of her humble artisan village. Unfortunately, when a group of allies gathered to confront the region's oppressors with all their might, the plan tragically failed, and all the rebels ended up being brutally murdered. Upon receiving the devastating news of the cowardly execution of her beloved sister, the youngest of the children in the story, who possessed a genius talent for combat, completely lost her mind and went insane with grief. Consumed by a fit of rage, the youngest daughter began a relentless and merciless hunt against absolutely all the perpetrators who caused her sister's death. She goes on to recount that, despite taking the lives of many enemies, the faction's forces were too great, causing the youngest soul hunter to also be cornered and brutally murdered. Confused and frightened by that tragic outcome, the one-eyed informant questions the young master about the true meaning of that dark story. Yeon So-hyun laments that those two orphaned and hardworking sisters of the past were unable to even leave their names or their noble intentions recorded in history. He bitterly points out that narratives from the martial arts world portrayed them only as traitors and public enemies, causing the population to curse their memory. The pavilion owner honestly admits that, however hard she tries, she still can't understand the young master's purpose in telling her all that. With his back to her, he explains that this is a harsh lesson about how the good often fall foolishly while the wicked triumph, questioning whether she truly plans to carry out her justice even if it costs dozens of innocent lives. The young man turns his back definitively and questions whether she will maintain this blind determination, even knowing that ordinary, innocent people will die because of her actions. The informant's eyes widen, and she resolutely vows to do absolutely everything in her power to prevent such a tragedy from happening. Enveloped by a dense and frightening dark energy, he reflects that changing the course of history requires much bloodshed, something that pure and kind souls could never bear to witness firsthand. As he placed the white mask over his face amidst the fog of souls, he bitterly concluded that the sisters had sacrificed only themselves, even knowing that absolutely nothing would change in the end. The woman with the eye patch turns completely pale and shocked as she recognizes the terrifying energy of the mask he has just put on. Strongly influenced by Jam Jinchen's writings, Yeon So-hyun recalls that in her youth she also dreamed of changing the injustices of the world, but realized too late that it was nothing more than a sweet childhood illusion. Heavy, imposing footsteps break the silence of the night, beginning to echo as he slowly walks towards the exit. A colossal storm of dark purple flames explodes around his body, reminding everyone that his destiny as the rightful heir to the Sword Clan would never allow him to live in peace. He admits that he tried to find tranquility by relinquishing his greed and his inheritance rights, foolishly hoping to be as free as the wind that cuts through the mountains. The young master reveals with intimidating fury through the gleaming eyes of his mask that he failed to change his destiny, but that the future of those two sisters is not yet sealed. The pavilion's owner trembles with sheer terror upon hearing the main heir declare, in a foreboding tone, that he will closely watch their fate from now on. Under the strong mystical influence of the shadows, he vows to silently observe whether the paths they tread will eventually intersect or merge with his own darkness. The young man arrogantly proclaims that his path now belongs solely to the demonic road of the underworld, where mountains of corpses and oceans of blood will be created to achieve justice. The informant watches his colossal silhouette disappear completely on the horizon, silently praying that their paths will never have to cross again in that eternal darkness. Catching her breath with extreme difficulty, she leans against the wall, trembling with fear as she questions herself about the true hidden identity of that young man. The narrative travels to the dark and miserable slums of Luoyang, a place consumed by the absence of mercy and common sense that served as the perfect breeding ground for new recruits of the Black Bones faction. At the top of a wooden shack, one of the bald, muscular generals of the gang observes the full moon in a thoughtful and relaxed manner. Proudly examining the death tattoos on his shoulder, he celebrates that his promotion within the criminal faction is very close, when suddenly a hoarse and mysterious voice calls to him from the shadows. The brute lowered his gaze, intrigued and surprised by that sudden and audacious interruption of his calm. Under the moonlight, the terrifying figure of Yeon So-hyun, wearing a white mask and enveloped in purple energy, mysteriously emerges. The bald giant shrugs disdainfully and tells the skinny boy to leave before he loses his temper and decides to resort to violence. With his eyes gleaming brightly behind the wooden cracks, the main heir retorts ironically, saying that he certainly didn't come here to solicit recruitment. The brute is amused by the intruder's audacity and decides to propose a special two-blow survival test to spare his life. With a disgusting and sadistic grin on his lips, the mercenary clenches his gigantic fists, ready to massacre the boy in a matter of seconds. Yeon So-hyun's dark aura boils intensely around his face as he silently laments how slow and foolish that man can be. Furious at the boy's indifference, the giant swiftly advances, delivering a colossal direct punch to his opponent's face. With supernatural and frightening speed, the young master simply disappears from the path of the brute's attack. He bizarrely appears, perched atop the massive shoulders of the bewildered giant, commenting mockingly that he will be very generous to a mere doorman. Yeon So-hyun gripped the trembling mercenary's head with extreme force, coldly announcing that she had come to that workshop solely to devour the essence of them all. The scripture of Jim Jinshin begins to throb intensely, ruthlessly, and relentlessly draining the life force of the bald giant. The boy effortlessly throws it into the storm of purple flames, frantically questioning whether they should officially begin that grand feast of souls tonight. The mercenary writhes in pain amidst the purple spiritual fire, screaming desperately and unable to understand the true meaning of his harsh words. With a completely crazed look behind his disguise, the young man extends his black, flaming hand and ironically orders the man to begin singing in pain. He delivers a devastating spiritual blow that shatters the wooden planks of the workshop into 1,000 pieces of rubble. The boy ironically states that the most important part of singing is actually breathing, delivering a brutal punch directly to the giant's throat, who screams in pain. Yeon So-hyun sadistically celebrates the success of the move and vows to meticulously break each of the man's bones into 3 equal parts. With his single eye glowing intensely purple behind the artifact, he announces with a macabre laugh that the time has come for the next, painful step. He leaps swiftly toward other mercenaries who were trying to attack him from behind amidst the dust. Another brute from the faction is completely engulfed by the dark spiritual flames, letting out a final desperate whimper of pure agony. Standing atop the piles of lifeless bodies of his enemies, the young master lets out a mocking laugh, noting that they didn't even manage to survive to witness his second move. His demonic and chilling laughter echoed loudly throughout the silent courtyard of that Luoyang workshop under the moonlight. He wonders to himself if the previously unfinished, eyeless mask had finally found its perfect match of darkness with his soul. Suddenly, the frantic sound of quick footsteps running towards him breaks the morbid silence of the place. 3 armed mercenaries burst into the courtyard and recoiled, pale, upon encountering that terrifying figure, demanding to know through shouts who that white-masked monster was. It all begins when Yeon So-hyun appears in her dark disguise and calmly greets everyone in the courtyard. One of the guards recoils in fright and shouts, asking who the hell that sinister figure is. The muscular henchmen are outraged and question how he dares to cause such a commotion at one of the Black Bones faction's headquarters. With his face smeared with blood and his eyes gleaming purple, the young master says they don't need to know his name and invites them to enjoy the feast together. One of the warriors charges forward furiously, calling the boy crazy, while a purple smoke begins to cover the battlefield. The brute leaps up wielding a huge sword and shouts that the invader is practically begging to die. Without showing any effort, Yeon So-hyun blocks the violent blow of the heavy blade with her own arms. At that point, he strikes one of his opponents in the face with extreme brutality. The impact is so devastating that blood splatters everywhere amidst the dust. The defeated warrior's body collapses inert to the ground under the terrified gaze of his companions. Desperate at such violence, the enemies shout for everyone to attack and kill the boy immediately. Yeon So-hyun merely gives a dark laugh beneath her mask and remarks that no true banquet is complete without a good dance. He extends his hand, invoking the power of the shadows, and commands his enemies to fight with all their might. An immense explosion of purple energy and dark claws spreads overwhelmingly throughout the courtyard. The mercenaries scream in agony as they are brutally struck and pierced by that relentless demonic force. The young master celebrates maniacally, saying that the place has truly transformed into the perfect party hall full of music, dancing, and food. More enemies spit blood and writhe in agony as they are eliminated one by the energy storm. The souls and vitality of the fallen warriors are violently swallowed by the dark currents that rise to the heavens. A pile of dry, lifeless corpses tumbles heavily onto the damp courtyard floor under the moonlight. Yeon So-hyun remains standing in the center of the destruction, her malevolent aura shining intensely. He looks around and wonders disdainfully if the fun has already ended so quickly. The young man laments, somewhat disappointed, commenting that he was only just beginning to get into the rhythm of the fight. He grabs the collar of a trembling survivor and decides he will have to satisfy his insatiable hunger using what's left there. As he lifts the desperate man by the neck, the Dark Sovereign begins to examine the victim's body. The young master lets out a terrifying laugh as he wonders which part of that worm will bring him the most satisfaction when consumed. Suddenly, a beam of bluish light cuts through the air at high speed towards the boy. Yeon So-hyun senses the imminent danger and abruptly stops her action. With a spectacular acrobatic move, he dodges the slashing attack that grazes his body. A powerful warrior with spiky hair emerges, wielding his sword, and proclaims himself the next adversary of the white-masked monster. The swordsman leaps, unleashing a rapid sequence of aerial strikes while calling the boy a puppet. The young master blocks all swift attacks, using only his protective energy barrier. The opponent lands heavily on the cracked ground after a rapid exchange of blows. Yeon So-hyun calmly turns her back, leaving the swordsman confused by her complete indifference. The boy gives a wry smile beneath his mask, finding it very interesting that a decent martial artist has finally emerged to fight. The two opponents face each other in the distance, in an extremely tense silence under the starry sky. The swordsman becomes enraged and warns in a threatening tone that he will put an end to that arrogant monster once and for all. With a swift impulse, the warrior once again advances at full speed across the stone courtyard. He leaps with a powerful war cry, delivering a downward strike with his gleaming blade. The man executes his special technique, generating multiple beams of blue energy that cut through the air toward the young master. Yeon So-hyun defends against the overwhelming barrage of attacks directly, causing the energies to collide intensely. He begins to laugh loudly at the enemy's attack while manipulating his dark flames to counterattack. The two colossal forces clash in the center of the courtyard, and the boy cynically asks if that's all he has to offer. Completely exhausted and sweating from fatigue, the swordsman curses in frustration upon realizing the difference in power. A dark claw of energy emerges from the shadows, ready to deliver the coup de grace. The Dark Sovereign unleashes a relentless attack that strikes the opponent in midair with extreme violence. The warrior lets out a groan of pure pain as he is overwhelmingly subdued by the dark technique. The swordsman's body is brutally thrown against the cracked floor of the inner courtyard. Yeon So-hyun observes him from above with utter superiority amidst the purple mist that slowly dissipates. He sighs wearily beneath the cursed mask, remarking that it's a shame the fight ended just when he was having fun. Meanwhile, the scene changes, revealing a dark stone staircase that leads directly to the secret underground chamber of the Black Bones faction. Calm, rhythmic footsteps echo down the stone stairs as Yeon So-hyun descends into the depths of the secret hideout, passing macabre traces scattered on the floor. Suddenly, the boy tilts his head slightly as he detects a hostile movement creeping in from the shadows. One of the remaining guards leaps out of the darkness, brandishing a weapon, and shouts furiously, questioning how he dared to trespass on that sacred place before attempting to attack him. With a swift dodge and a lethal counterattack of purple energy, the young master neutralizes the attacker's threat in a fraction of a second. The opponent's body is brutally thrown and crashes against the damp stone floor of the underground corridor. Yeon So-hyun continues walking unperturbed, the dark smoke of her aura gently enveloping her steps. He finally reaches the main chamber and is confronted with a terrifying scene, where dozens of lifeless bodies are suspended by chains under spiritual flames. Behind his white mask, the boy's eyes gleam intensely as he tries to process the true nature of that terrifying place. He approaches one of the surviving mercenaries who is lying on the ground, making the man tremblingly plead with the monster not to take another step. Completely ignoring the desperate pleas, the young master steps with extreme firmness on the leg of the fallen enemy. A sharp crack echoes through the room as the boy crushes the man's member, who screams in pain and despair, begging him to stop the torture. While the criminal lies writhing on the ground, clutching his broken leg, Yeon So-hyun silently reflects that this den of depravity resembles a veritable human slaughterhouse. He observes the extreme cruelty of the place, filled with boiling cauldrons and the lifeless bodies of innocents hanging from the ceiling, bitterly concluding that this world is completely insane. The wounded mercenary curses him furiously, calling him a damned monster, but the young man coldly retorts, questioning whether the atrocities they commit should be considered normal. The young master roughly grabs the man by the hair, listening to the criminal cynically try to justify himself by claiming it's all just a lucrative business. The prisoner screams in panic, claiming that this cruel activity is the only way they have to guarantee the sustenance and survival of their families in the underworld. Overcome with profound revulsion at so much hypocrisy, the eyes of the Dark Sovereign gleam with an overwhelming murderous energy. With a devastating blow enveloped in purple flames, he brutally hurls the man against the stone walls of the dungeon. The impact crushes the criminal's bones permanently, putting an end to the gang's wicked excuses once and for all. Looking at the lifeless body on the floor, Yeon So-hyun reflects on the irony of being called crazy for killing sinners, while those who enslave and sell innocents call their crimes business. He removes his wooden mask to gently comfort the face of a rescued young prisoner, wondering if the true madness resides within him or in the very structure of that unjust world. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the opulent weekly hideout of the criminal leadership beneath the Luoyang night sky. In the luxurious thermal baths of the property, The beautiful and ruthless Geumju relaxes peacefully while a red rose floats gently on the warm water. Holding the delicate flower in her hands, she begins to reflect thoughtfully on the mysterious, swordless heir she met earlier. She recalls the secret information she received from her inside contacts, which expressly guaranteed that the first young master of the Sword Clan should not have left his quarters that day. The image of Yan So-yan's calm and enigmatic smile flashes through her mind, making her wonder if absolutely no one knew the boy's true plans from the start. She admits to herself that the young nobleman she met showed none of the weaknesses mentioned in the rumors, displaying a truly unusual and intimidating confidence. Even surrounded by dozens of armed men and an elite guard, the boy showed no sign of fear, raising suspicions about what hidden secrets the young master might be concealing. Deciding she's just overthinking the matter, the villainess closes her eyes and calls her head butler to complain that the bathwater is starting to get cold. The man with the scar on his face swallows hard, quite nervously, and promptly responds to his lady's request. He bows respectfully and hurries away to provide what was requested without wasting a second. The head butler shouts authoritatively at his subordinates, ordering them to immediately bring more heat to the mistress's baths. Two muscular executioners emerge carrying helpless prisoners who cry and desperately beg for their lives amidst the steamy atmosphere. Geumju observes the new victims with a look of profound disdain and boredom, coldly commenting that the captives brought in lately don't seem very invigorating. While a young prisoner is held by her hair at the water's edge, begging for mercy, the villain demands that her servants be much more discerning in their future choices. The criminal leader coldly gives the order to begin the cruel rejuvenation process, completely ignoring the victim's hysterical screams of terror. One of the executioners raises a sharp, gleaming blade to the neck of the poor young woman who desperately cries out for help. A terrible scream of pain echoes through the walls of the hall at the exact moment the fatal blow is delivered without any mercy. Fresh, warm blood spurts forcefully, mixing macabrely with the clear water of the thermal pool. Collecting the reddish liquid in the palm of her hand, Geumju lets out a sigh of relief and comments that she was seriously worried about the appearance of new wrinkles on her face. She disgustingly washes her own face with the victim's warm blood, reveling in this bizarre beauty ritual. With her face stained red and a maniacal grin on her lips, the villain lets out a sinister laugh under the reddish glow of the place. Suddenly, a messenger interrupts the moment, shouting and bringing the urgent report that one of their main secret factories has been attacked and completely destroyed. Now, wearing a red silk robe in front of her mirror, Geumju turns around startled and questions the news in a shocked tone. With an extremely sharp gaze and consumed by fury, she demands to know immediately who was the audacious person responsible for committing that affront against her business. The subordinate explains, trembling, that they don't have precise details because all the guards lost their minds in terror and ended up dying too quickly at the hands of the invader. Gritting her teeth in anger, the blonde insists that the men who were there must have mentioned some characteristic or word about the attacker before they perished. The head butler hesitantly reveals that the survivors were delirious with panic, calling the mysterious intruder an evil spirit, a demon, and a shadow monster. Geumju murmurs those words sharply, while his subordinate adds fearfully that some of the men spoke specifically about the use of a strange white mask. With her eyes blazing with a red hue of pure murderous fury, the villainess repeats the detail about the white mask upon realizing exactly who she is dealing with in the underworld of Luoyang. The head butler humbly justifies himself, explaining that the guards died so quickly that it was impossible to obtain a detailed account of what happened from them. Thoughtfully, Geumju concludes seriously that her men must have been involved in a deadly battle against some extraordinary master of martial arts. The subordinate adds, quite nervously, that the previous year a similar mistake had provoked a mysterious master, resulting in the complete annihilation of one of his branches. The man thoughtfully reflects that individuals born with the special talent to manipulate internal energy are already extremely rare in the world. He complements his reasoning by noting that, among these rare prodigies, the group that actually manages to break through the barriers to become a master is an even more restricted minority. Adjusting her strands of golden hair, Geumju ponders ironically how bizarre it is that they constantly encounter these so-called rare masters during their business in the city. With a serious look, she orders all the henchmen to avoid causing any trouble for a while, hoping that the mysterious assailant will vent his fury elsewhere and leave on his own. The villain appears quite annoyed, questioning which idler is interfering with her business and grumbling that people shouldn't put idiotic hero ideas into young people's heads. The leader walks imposingly in her red robe while dictating to her subordinates the need to adapt to the pragmatic rules of the city's commercial underworld. Suddenly, the spiky-haired warrior bites his finger thoughtfully and murmurs, intrigued, about the rumor of the hungry ghost. Gumju stopped walking immediately upon hearing the murmur and turned around, demanding sharply to know if he had discovered any relevant new information. The henchman explains that he remembers several clients of his betting houses who simply disappeared inexplicably a few days ago. The other subordinate interjects, arguing that these disposable henchmen frequently disappear, and that's why he didn't find it necessary to investigate their disappearance thoroughly at the time. The spiky-haired warrior timidly agrees with his colleague's words, but maintains an extremely worried and tense expression. Furious at the unnecessary mystery, Gumju yells at the henchman, demanding that he stop stalling and get to the point of the conversation. The subordinate confesses, stammering with fear, that he frequents that gambling house, and that he heard a very specific rumor there that now makes perfect sense. According to eyewitness accounts, Yeon So-hyun manifested that day as a truly hungry ghost that consumes the souls of anyone who crosses her path. The henchman admits to himself that he doesn't usually believe in silly superstitions, but confesses that the sheer number of identical accounts makes it impossible to ignore the creature's existence. The villainess finally loses her patience and yells at the man, questioning whether he really intends to use foolish accounts of agonizing scum in a serious business meeting. Gumju crosses her arms in irritation and demands that, as professionals of the underworld, they focus only on truly productive conversations about the gang's losses. However, her gaze suddenly freezes in shock as she has a terrifying premonition about the identity of the hidden enemy. The blonde begins to sweat with terror as she considers whether there truly exists in the world another being as bizarre and intimidating as the secret master who taught her forbidden arts in the past. The tension in the room is abruptly broken when a messenger bursts in, shouting desperately about a new tragedy that has befallen the gang. The guard reveals in a panic that another of his clandestine bases of operation has just been completely destroyed and looted. Her face contorted with apprehension, the gang leader asks if the attacker has used the same disguise again, and the messenger confirms, terrified, that the attack was once again carried out by the man in the white mask. The villain rests her hand on her face in a sign of profound exhaustion and admits that she expected to lose a few more points of sale before the invader finally calmed down. She reflects with frustration that the absurd speed at which her protected branches are falling proves that the hidden enemy is in fact a master of the highest martial echelon in the province. The henchman coldly suggests that they stick to the plan of not reacting for now, arguing that the loss of ordinary soldiers is insignificant since they are easily replaceable in the underworld. The head butler compliments the cold idea by pointing out that hiring mercenaries or hired masters to defend them would cost an exorbitant fortune for the faction's coffers. Fed up with that crisis-ridden meeting, Gyeomju curtly orders everyone to get out of her sight and asks for a massage therapist to be brought in to relieve all her accumulated tension. The subordinate bows respectfully and assures her that he will attend to his lady's request immediately before leaving the room. However, before he can cross the exit, the large wooden gate is violently flung open by yet another wounded guard, desperately crying out about terrible new problems. Gyeomju turns around quickly, her teeth clenched with pure hatred, mentally begging that this isn't another attack against her property. The bright morning sun rises gloriously over the beautiful and imposing traditional buildings of the great city of Luoyang the following morning. In the markets and alleyways of the commercial district, citizens whisper excitedly about the incredible rumor that 5 Black Bones faction bases were overwhelmingly destroyed in a single night. Another resident joins the somewhat skeptical gossip, claiming to have heard reliable sources stating that the actual number of destroyed sites was actually 7 bases. The conversation is gaining new, inflated figures among the merchants, with some claiming that 10 locations were destroyed, while others swear that the massacre affected 15 bases. A shocked resident comments that rumors say not a single corpse was left behind in the ruins of the enemy properties. The other shopkeeper confirms the collective fear, adding that the attacker made people disappear without leaving a single drop of blood on the walls, under that dark and mysterious energy. In the imposing palace of the prestigious Luoyang sword family, a towering and irritated voice echoes, questioning why she is being bothered so early in the morning with matters considered so trivial. In the main hall, before dozens of lined-up officers, the acting patriarch of the clan severely questions Gyeomju about the complete lack of information from his side. Resting his chin on his hand with profound arrogance, the old master in yellow robes reprimands her in a hostile manner, calling her a cheeky brat for her lack of decorum. With a sharp, disdainful gaze, the powerful patriarch demands to know if the villainess dares to publicly insinuate that his glorious clan of heroes lacks military intelligence. Gyumju pales with terror under the immense spiritual pressure of the elder, feeling cold sweat trickle down her neck beneath the master's intimidating gaze. Losing all her previous proud composure, she bows deeply in a sign of extreme submission and sincerely apologizes for her inappropriate behavior. The military leader coldly warns her about the need to recognize her proper place in the hierarchy, accusing her of being under a foolish illusion of equality. Exuding an overwhelming red aura, the interim patriarch questions her about whether she truly believed the bronze plaque was given to her faction because of her father's political influence. The blonde keeps her head down and stammers, trembling with fear, vowing that she would never dare to entertain such outrageous and foolish thoughts regarding the power of the Sword family. The old man's silence continues to dominate the hall as the sand from an ancient wooden hourglass slowly drips onto the table. The powerful interim patriarch of the clan concludes his sermon coldly, complaining that he has already wasted a precious 15 minutes of his time on that insignificant conversation. The acting patriarch of the Luoyang clan coldly orders Gyumju to immediately disappear from his presence. The blonde swallowed hard in horror and bowed extremely deeply before withdrawing. She walks with long, hurried strides through the immense hall, trying to contain the humiliation and fury that boil in her chest. Analyzing the documents in his hands, the old master warns relentlessly that he will tolerate no more mistakes. Hearing the elder's stern warning behind her, Gyumju stops walking for a moment and trembles with sheer nervousness. The patriarch concludes coldly, vowing that if she disappoints him again, he will hand over the sacred bronze symbol of the family to another ally. The villain is completely paralyzed and shocked by this real threat that could destroy all her power in the city's underworld. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the astronomer's cabin in the Sword Clan, where a voice screams, ordering him to wake up once and for all. Inside the cluttered room, the astronomer appears, snoring deeply with his head resting on a pile of old manuscripts. His assistant sighs deeply at his colleague's laziness, lamenting that he will have no choice but to wake him by force. The guard shakes him abruptly, shouting that an absolute emergency has just occurred. Giving the sleepy astronomer a terrible fright, the man asks his colleague to calm down and reports that he saw something truly disturbing during his night watch the previous night. He focuses his gaze and states with extreme seriousness that he witnessed an incredibly dark and ominous sign in the sky. The astronomer takes a sip of water in a relaxed manner, arguing that small omens in the sky are quite common occurrences. However, the messenger approaches and assures them that the previous night's phenomenon was a catastrophic omen for the entire clan. The astronomer's eyes widened as he heard his colleague state that the legendary and feared celestial murder star had returned to shine brightly in the cosmos. He spits out his drink in utter shock, questioning whether the terrible star of destruction has truly reappeared after so long. The boy recalls the old legends that warned that the appearance of that cursed star was always accompanied by bloody tragedies and endless devastation. The man sits with an extremely serious expression, admitting that if that information is true, they are facing an unprecedented crisis. The assistant clutches his head in anguish and suggests they immediately send a formal report to the clan's superiors. The astronomer dismisses the idea with a wry laugh, arguing that no authority in the clan would believe in such a mystical omen nowadays. The colleague insists that they should at least notify the supervising officer directly in charge of that intelligence division. The astronomer remains skeptical that the notification will change anything, but the assistant insists that it is their duty to pass on the information. He recalls with disdain that their supervisor is considered the weakest man and without any real authority within the entire Sword family. Night falls quickly over a humble refugee camp located on the outskirts of the city. A group of disciples gathers anxiously around a blind elder, wondering if he can see any spiritual vision today. One of the men sharply reprimands his colleague, ordering him to stop pressuring Master Hut while he is focused on his thoughts. Old Master Hut remains seated motionless on the dark floor, his eyes blindfolded, displaying immense spiritual tension. With a trembling voice, he reveals that the sky has been completely swallowed by absolute darkness, preventing the sunlight from shining through. Suddenly, the old man experiences a mystical shock as he senses the approach of an overwhelming energy. Barefoot, firm footsteps are detected by Master Hut, who falls into complete despair at this supernatural presence. The old man rose, shouting that the Dark Sovereign had finally revealed himself to them that night. He raises his trembling hands to the heavens, asking if the demonic scripture has awakened the ancient monster that devours the light and makes the universe tremble in terror. The refugees watch the scene in utter terror as the elder proclaims that the executor of divine punishment has descended from the deepest darkness. The old prophet concludes by commanding all the needy and hungry to celebrate with immense joy the arrival of that judgment. He cries out in a trance that a black lightning bolt will strike in place of the apathetic heavens to punish sinners through the might of the sovereign of darkness. The disciples exchange glances of extreme distrust and whisper amongst themselves that old Master Hut has probably gone completely mad due to his advanced age. Laughing hysterically with pure joy, the blind old man runs into the darkness of the forest to meet his true master. Ancient legends warned that any sinner who encountered the executioner in the white mask should bow down and confess their crimes, hiding absolutely nothing before his merciless judgment. The following day, news that the feared Black Bones faction had been brought to the brink of total annihilation in just 2 days spread like wildfire. Inside the Crescent Moon Pavilion, Seoa analyzes the clues with her bodyguard and points out that the main suspect behind the attacks is the man in the white mask. The one-eyed informant intently recalls that the mysterious young master she met in the courtyard wore that exact same wooden disguise. She turns thoughtfully to the side and asks Gyu directly what she thinks about the whole mystery. Gyu, Seoa's skilled bodyguard, blinks slightly confused and asks what specific matter her mistress is referring to. The leader specifies that she wants to know his impressions of the main heir of the Sword Clan, but Gyu refers to him using the derogatory nickname, the Swordless One. Seoa becomes furious and slams her hand on the table, firmly ordering her never to use that disrespectful nickname again, prompting an immediate apology from her subordinate. The bodyguard explained that she simply felt the young man's behavior was infinitely superior and completely different from what the malicious rumors in town were saying. The pavilion leader sternly warns her to be very careful with her words when referring to the secrets of the Sword Clan. Gyu smiles slightly and adds that he found the main heir to be an incredibly open-minded man with truly admirable generosity. She reveals her surprise when she recounts that she tried to intimidate the young master by unleashing her full combat-ready murderous aura, but the boy didn't even react and completely ignored her. Seoa ponders in absolute silence the incredible revelation she has just received from her bodyguard. Back at the Crescent Moon Pavilion, shouts of indignation echo loudly, questioning what on earth Gyu had been doing during his time of service. In the kitchen of the establishment, young Jung-ah tends to the fireplace while her older sister watches her silently. The youngest sister turns around, holding a pan, and asks gently if her sister is referring to their young master. Seoa calmly deflects the question, explaining that she only had the innocent interest of discovering what kind of person the gentleman the youngest daughter serves wholeheartedly really is. Jung-ah refocuses on preparing the food and replies with a gentle smile that she doesn't have much to say about the young man. The informant finds it very strange and mocks the fact that the youngest daughter is so quiet, recalling that in their last conversation she almost attacked him to defend the young master's honor. The older sister sets aside the teasing and asks if she's feeling better, receiving a positive and grateful confirmation from Jung-ah. Seoa directly suggests that if the youngest daughter has any doubts about the main heir, the best course of action would be to ask him directly. A hot, impeccably aromatic tea is delicately served in a small white porcelain cup. In the pavilion's tea room, Yeon So-yeon ironically warns the bodyguard to curb her murderous combat intent so as not to ruin the taste of the drink. Gyu apologizes, claiming there's nothing to worry about as his previous mission has officially come to an end, leaving the pavilion leader surprised. With a friendly smile, the young master offers them the warm tea and suggests they drink it while it's still hot. The pavilion owner expresses her gratitude respectfully, but awkwardly ponders the unnecessary nature of a nobleman personally serving a mere bodyguard. Accepting the cup offered by the main heir, Gyu respectfully thanks the young man for his unusual hospitality. She takes a sip and compliments the wonderful aroma of the tea, making Seoa wonder to herself if her subordinate is really being serious, given her relaxed demeanor. Yeon So-hyun receives the compliment calmly and humbly, maintaining her friendly and tranquil demeanor. Gyu firmly insists that she is not merely being polite, and emphasizes that she is not the type of woman who usually gives empty compliments to anyone. Resting his hand on his chin with a slight smile, the young master jokingly says that he finds her a very interesting person and invites her to look him up if she ever wants to change jobs. The warrior gladly accepts the invitation, ironically noting that given her direct supervisor's current mood, she'll probably need a new job very soon. Yeon So-hyun let out a loud, relaxed laugh at the bodyguard's bold response. Seoa watches the scene tensely, finding it unbelievable to see her most grumpy employee acting so casually alongside an heir considered useless by the clan. The boy wipes his mouth lightly and begins the main topic in a calm and deliberate manner. He questions what would bring a businesswoman as busy as she is to visit a man as idle and without great ambitions as him. The eye-patched informant assumes an extremely serious and focused posture at the other end of the table. She fixes her one eye on the boy and asks directly if he is the legendary Dark Sovereign. Maintaining a mysterious smile behind her teacup, Yeon So-hyun feigns ignorance and cynically deflects the question by asking what that mystical warrior title could be. The informant explains in detail that she obtained credible accounts from survivors who escaped the recent massacre by the Black Bones faction. She reveals that survivors described the savior as a ruthless warrior who wore white school uniforms and a white wooden mask. The young master smiles and calmly remarks that, judging by the witnesses' descriptions, this mysterious hero seems to be someone who performs good deeds around the world. Seoa counters the argument by pointing out that the boy possesses the exact same mask model and the same student attire among his personal belongings. Displaying a cynical and provocative smile, Yeon So-hyun questions her about whether she is planning to disrespectfully search her accommodations and personal belongings. The woman persists in frustration, demanding to know the true meaning of those intimidating words he uttered against her during their previous encounter in the courtyard. The young man holds his teacup in silence, letting the tension fill the room for a few seconds. He looks at her seriously and asks if she is truly prepared to face the consequences of her choices. With a firm and unwavering expression, the informant assures with complete conviction that she is fully prepared to proceed with her plans. Yeon So-hyun provocatively questions her about whether her blind determination would be strong enough to endure the inevitable deaths of dozens of innocent people on her journey. Shaken by the depth of that blunt question, she trembles as she confesses that she has spent the last few days obsessively reflecting on the young master's warnings. She recalls the terrifying metaphorical vision of a vast river of historical blood being diverted by the brutal force of dark flames. Seoa clenches her own fist with extreme force, accepting the weight that the sacrifice of innocent lives is the necessary price to change the structure of that unjust world. Staring intently at the principal heir, she asks in a firm voice if the real objective behind his actions is a dynastic revolution against the current empire. The boy gives an amused smile and repeats the term revolution in a rather reflective and relaxed manner. He quotes the ancient words of Mencius about how those who undermine goodness and justice are nothing more than vulgar criminals unworthy of governing. The heir argues that a sovereign without military or moral virtues loses the divine right to the throne and comes to be seen only as a common and decadent commoner. Analyzing his own distorted reflection in the teacup, he adds that dethroning a corrupt tyrant would never be classified as a cowardly assassination in the eyes of history. The pavilion's owner stares at him seriously and hesitantly asks if that bloody path of revolution is the true path he has chosen to follow. Her mind is invaded by the terrifying vision of a true demonic kingdom overtaken by colossal mountains of lifeless bodies and crimson oceans of blood. Completely disturbed by that terrifying image of the forbidden martial path to the underworld, she questions whether such a revolution would truly be viable in the clan's current times of seclusion. Seoa confesses with her head down that this type of complex questioning completely surpasses her intellectual abilities to understand reality. Observing her from across the imposing table, Yeon So-hyun reflects on the bizarre stability of a world where extreme social inequality between nobles and peasants has never been so severe in history. Yeon So-hyun smiles subtly and declares bluntly that a conventional revolution in such a chaotic era would be utter nonsense. The one-eyed informant seriously questions him about what the true path to justice he intends to follow might be. The young man explains intently that he has been thinking deeply about the need for bloodshed to change the course of the empire's history. He melancholically questions whether the lives sacrificed must necessarily be those of humble, ordinary people who take up arms only to die for someone else's cause. With a sadistic grin and eyes gleaming demonically, he proposes the alternative idea of simply eliminating all wicked men from the world. Seoa is completely paralyzed and confused upon hearing such a shocking and absurd statement from the young master. He stares intently at her and suggests that the bloodshed of the wicked should reach exactly the same proportion as the innocent lives that would be lost in a traditional war. The woman tries to maintain her composure and tensely questions him, asking if all of this is just a bad joke about the tragedies of the underworld. Yeon So-hyun calmly rises from the table, enigmatically explaining that the entire conversation is merely a theoretical hypothesis. He walks towards the window to admire the garden view, claiming that he simply enjoys reflecting on these alternative paths of destiny. The informant reflects to herself that judging someone else's karma is a childish idea and wonders how he could so easily distinguish the good from the bad. She skeptically considers that traditional standards of judgment, such as imperial laws or common morals, tend to constantly change according to the situation of each clan. The pavilion's owner adds loudly that no one in the world would be able to exterminate criminals in sufficient numbers to change the course of human history. She earnestly warns him that punishing sinners arbitrarily and based on personal whims is the typical attitude of a dangerous lunatic and represents an even greater evil. However, a terrifying chill runs down Seoa's spine in the next millisecond as she makes a frightening connection in her mind. The mental image of the dreaded white-masked reaper carrying out divine punishment in the shadows returns with full force to his thoughts. She remembers the mystical creature sent to unleash the fury of darkness against the tyrants who took advantage of the negligence of the heavens. Completely pale and sweating with terror, the one-eyed woman finally whispers the legendary title of the Dark Sovereign in his direction. The young master flashes a menacing smile in the dim light and sarcastically remarks that he finds that nickname an excellent name for the executioner of punishments. Seoa stares at the boy's figure seriously, realizing that what she considered a childish hypothesis is about to become a bloody reality. Yeon So-hyun confesses with a sinister look that he is extremely curious to find out if the Dark Sovereign's actions will be successful in the real world. The woman reflects in horror on whether demanding the price of karma in the name of the weak is a path only a truly inhuman demon could tread to the end. Overcome by a mixture of dread and profound awe, she mentally laments the gravity of that blood oath. Seoa quickly rises from her chair and formally thanks the main heir for his advice before announcing her immediate departure. The young man wishes her a good day at work while watching the informant's silhouette walk away in the company of her bodyguard. Outside, the pavilion leader comments to her subordinate that the Black Bones faction now only has its main operation stronghold to rely on. She reveals that she intends to personally lead a small elite group to initiate the final siege against the enemy base later today. The main heir discreetly warns her about the dangers of the mission, reminding her that the Luoyang sword family will show no mercy in protecting their bronze symbol. Seoa assures that her forces will not carry out a direct invasion, mysteriously revealing that there is already someone else in charge of carrying out that violent work in the shadows. The woman displays a determined look and vows that her gang's objective will be solely to prevent any surviving henchmen from escaping the main fortress alive. She coldly adds that if the Sword Clan decides to cause trouble because of their actions, they will simply confront the opposition head-on. The leader argues that the entire Hero Clan wouldn't get involved, and that they would only need to deal with the corrupt patriarch who granted Geumju the protection token. The informant walks towards the exit accompanied by her loyal bodyguard, proudly declaring that she possesses the military determination necessary for that war. Yeon So-hyun remained seated alone in the pavilion's silent tea room, mentally preparing to take her next and decisive step that night. He approaches the balcony of the property to contemplate the last rays of the twilight sun on the horizon. Meanwhile, a fierce and extremely violent sword attack is mercilessly unleashed in the middle of the enemy camp. The bloodthirsty enforcer of the Black Bones faction brutally takes the life of a fleeing henchman, warning that attempting to desert the gang is an offense punishable by death. The traitor's decapitated skull falls lifeless onto the damp ground of the gang's operational base. Wielding his blade covered in fresh blood, the executioner glares hatefully at the trembling criminals and openly accuses them of cowardice in the face of danger. He noisily points his weapon and shouts that he is merely following the direct and absolute orders given by Gumju. The captain raises his sword, urging the remaining warriors to prepare for an honorable death defending their faction's territory from any invader. Under the reddish sky of dusk, the luxurious buildings of Gumju's main hideout appear imposing and silent. Inside her main office, the red-clad villainess desperately asks if the interim patriarch has indeed refused to send military reinforcements to help her. The dark-robed messenger lowers his head humbly and confirms the sad truth about the powerful ally of the Sword Clan's refusal. Pressing her cheeks together in extreme frustration, the blonde realizes that the elder would never risk his valuable elite warriors against a threat of completely unknown military power. The villain grinds her teeth in pure fury as she bitterly acknowledges that the alliance of convenience they possessed is nothing more than a political farce, devoid of any real loyalty. She clenches her fist until the veins in her hand bulge with rage, knowing full well that all the adopted daughters of the infamous Geumjil are seen by the clan as nothing more than perfectly disposable pawns. The subordinate hesitantly informs her that Master Geumjil has sent her a confidential message of extreme urgency. Gumju impatiently demands that he reveal the contents of that secret correspondence once and for all, causing the man to stammer nervously before speaking. Upon hearing the harsh revelations contained in her father's message, the faction leader's bloodshot eyes widen, and she screams in pure terror and indignation at what she has just discovered. Overcome by uncontrollable hatred, Gumju destroys the furniture in her office with a deafening scream of pure fury. She tries to catch her breath while grinding her teeth in anger, feeling the cold sweat trickle down her face at the imminent ruin of her faction. The villain composes herself and coldly asks her subordinate the exact number of prisoners remaining in the main fortress. The messenger stammers with fear and explains that there are almost no prisoners there because commercial transactions rarely take place directly at that location. Gumju clutches her head in despair, lamenting having to resort, as a last resort, to that dark and dreadful technique taught by her terrible shadow master. Without showing any sign of hesitation, she curtly orders that all the prisoners and useless servants be immediately gathered into the underground dungeon. With a completely distorted and insane smile on her face, the villain celebrates that she will finally begin the macabre, sacrificial ritual taught by her master. In the late afternoon, a solitary crow flies silently over the traditional buildings illuminated by red lanterns. In the shadows of the nearby alleyways, the masked warriors of the Crescent Moon Pavilion await in absolute silence the orders to attack. The elite assassins position themselves flawlessly in the darkness, wielding daggers and sharp claws for battle. The bird flies over the rooftops, while the silent invaders prepare to deliver the coup de grace. One of the masked scouts crouches on the roof, intently observing the suspicious movements of the enemy guards in the inner courtyard. He makes a discreet nod to confirm the positioning of his allies before launching the attack. Inside the outpost, officers report to the operations commander that the 15th Assault Unit has already taken up its positions. The leader of the siege listens to the report seriously and orders the immediate confirmation of the presence of all soldiers at strategic points. With feline agility, one of the masked assassins leaps toward the courtyard to officially begin the siege. Several warriors leap gracefully between the rooftops under the orange light of twilight. One of the combatants' boots touches the damp ground of the enemy hideout without making the slightest sound. One of the spies kneels before Seoa and reports that all the innocent residents of that region have already been safely evacuated. He adds that absolutely all Allied agents are positioned and just waiting for the final signal to attack. With a discreet smile, the pavilion owner orders everyone to maintain their original positions and remain on high alert. Wearing her black battle attire and wielding her sword, she dictates the strict adherence to combat protocol against the criminal faction's henchmen. The great towers of Luoyang City appear illuminated by the orange sunset that marks the beginning of that night of judgment. Gazing at the golden sky from the terrace, the pavilion leader jokingly asks if her bodyguard is feeling nervous. The loyal Gyu approaches her mistress, maintaining a serious and focused expression in the face of the imminent combat. The informant confesses that she doesn't feel exactly nervous about the fight, but rather extremely conflicted about the revelations she has received. Seoa questions her about whether she actually overheard the entire confidential conversation she had earlier with the main heir of the Sword Clan. Gyu comically tries to deflect the conversation, swearing she hasn't heard anything about dangerous terms like revolutions and begs to be left out of the conspiracy. The pavilion owner smiles slightly and insistently asks her security guard for her honest opinion about the young man's personality. After a few seconds of hesitation, Gyu admits that he considers Yeon So-hyun a truly good man, although he possesses an absolutely terrifying power behind his friendly demeanor. Seo-ah asks if she would maintain that same positive opinion, even knowing that the boy is the feared Dark Sovereign, and the bodyguard confirms, trusting only her instincts. With a firm gaze and full of sincere loyalty, the black-masked warrior vows to follow in her mistress's footsteps wherever she may be. Overcome by a mixture of dread and profound awe, she mentally laments the gravity of that blood oath. Seo-ah quickly rises from her chair and formally thanks the main heir for his advice before announcing her immediate departure. The young man wishes her a good day at work while watching the informant's silhouette walk away in the company of her bodyguard. Outside, the pavilion leader comments to her subordinate that the Black Bones faction now only has its main operation stronghold to rely on. She reveals that she intends to personally lead a small elite group to initiate the final siege against the enemy base later today. The main heir discreetly warns her about the dangers of the mission, reminding her that the Luoyang sword family will show no mercy in protecting their bronze symbol. Seo-ah assures that her forces will not carry out a direct invasion, mysteriously revealing that there is already someone else in charge of carrying out that violent work in the shadows. The woman displays a determined look and vows that her gang's objective will be solely to prevent any surviving henchmen from escaping the main fortress alive. She coldly adds that if the Sword Clan decides to cause trouble because of their actions, they will simply confront the opposition head-on. The leader argues that the entire Hero Clan wouldn't get involved, and that they would only need to deal with the corrupt patriarch who granted Geumju the protection token. The informant walks towards the exit accompanied by her loyal bodyguard, proudly declaring that she possesses the military determination necessary for that war. Yeon So-hyun remained seated alone in the pavilion's silent tea room, mentally preparing to take her next and decisive step that night. He approaches the balcony of the property to contemplate the last rays of the twilight sun on the horizon. Meanwhile, a fierce and extremely violent sword attack is mercilessly unleashed in the middle of the enemy camp. The bloodthirsty enforcer of the Black Bones faction brutally takes the life of a fleeing henchman, warning that attempting to desert the gang is an offense punishable by death. The traitor's decapitated skull falls lifeless onto the damp ground of the gang's operational base. Wielding his blade covered in fresh blood, the executioner glares hatefully at the trembling criminals and openly accuses them of cowardice in the face of danger. With a perfect and devastating sword strike, the pavilion assassin cuts through the giant's defense and instantly ends his opponent's life. The enemy warrior collapses inert to the ground, letting out a final, muffled groan of pain. In the courtyard below, the general combat intensifies with extreme violence, filling the air with cries of despair and agony from both sides. One of the henchmen tries to retreat in terror as he sees an immense, dark claw of energy plummeting directly towards him. The captain of the guards realizes that the conventional defense has failed and shouts orders everyone to push against the walls to make room for reinforcements. The subordinates obey promptly as a new and massive line of lancers from the faction emerges menacingly in the courtyard. The feared garrison of lancers with skull tattoos marches imposingly, raising their sharp-pointed weapons against the invaders. One of the spies anxiously runs toward Seo-ah to warn her about the sudden arrival of the dreaded enemy spear line. The pavilion's owner analyzes the situation seriously, noting that the enemy has even withdrawn the guards from the main defensive fortress to reinforce the courtyard. She then orders that all reserve forces be sent in and gives field commanders complete freedom to act according to their own judgment. The warriors whistle in confirmation and quickly spread out through the fortress, leaving the leader satisfied with the retreat of the enemy's inner guard. The eye-patch-wearing informant believes the faction preferred to risk everything in a desperate counterattack in the courtyard, rather than protect the security of their main quarters. Gyu expresses his concern and questions whether there are truly allies willing to confront the faction without fearing the military might of the Luoyang clan that protects them. The boss manages a slightly awkward smile, leaving her security guard extremely intrigued by that silent reaction. Seo-ah casually admits that she has already verbally assumed full responsibility should things go wrong, eliciting a worried sigh from her subordinate. The blonde woman playfully justifies herself, reminding them that, in the end, they have the legendary Dark Sovereign fighting alongside them that night. She rests her hand on the railing and jokes that if the boy is half the incredible hero described in the rumors, they can only take advantage of his superhuman strength. Suddenly, a colossal explosion of fire and shrapnel completely destroys the wooden structure of that section of the building. Gyu reacts with extraordinary speed and leaps back, carrying Seoa in his arms to protect her from the collapsing balcony. The eye patch-wearing informant's eyes widen in utter shock as she beholds all that sudden and violent destruction. She tries to focus her gaze amidst the smoke and embers in the air, wondering what could have caused such a destructive impact. The loyal security guard stands firmly on the patio, frantically pleading for her boss's safety. The warrior in the black tunic successfully manages to shield her away from the danger zone of the collapse. Holding his mistress's shoulders as she groans in pain, Gyu asks with considerable concern if she is truly all right. Seoa rests her hand on her wound and tries to understand the origin of that dense, malevolent smoke spreading across the courtyard. She watches in horror as the immense wooden beams of the pavilion collapse, consumed by intense flames. A hysterical and purely demonic laugh echoes from the midst of the fire, freezing the blood of both warriors. The informant pales with terror as she recognizes the terrifying silhouette that begins to slowly emerge from the flames. Before them emerges the terrifying figure of Geumju, whose body has been completely transformed and deformed by a monstrous, reddish energy. The spiritual fire consumes the rest of the structure, while the fierce villain displays colossal claws and shoots down the invaders with her gaze. The rubble from the ceiling crashes violently onto the wooden floor, shattering any hope of an easy fight. Leaning on each other amidst the choking dust, the two women coughed with extreme difficulty in the face of that overwhelming presence. Seoa stares at her transformed opponent in utter disbelief, unable to formulate a rational explanation for that appearance. The villain prominently displays her immense demonic claws with sharp red nails, overflowing with an uncontrollable thirst for blood. With its blonde hair flowing freely and exuding a terrifying energy, the monster lunges heavily towards them. The pavilion leader stammers Gyumju's name in shock upon encountering her enemy's bizarre and grotesque transformation. The bodyguard trembles with terror as she questions how an ordinary human could have transformed into such a disgusting and hideous creature. With a sadistic grin brimming with sharp teeth and monstrous fangs, Gyumju focuses her single gleaming eye on the pavilion's owner. The villain leaps fiercely toward them, screaming that they will both die mercilessly by her own hands that night. Seoa is completely taken by surprise by the supernatural speed of the attack and panics upon seeing the deadly approach of her enemy. Gyu reacts purely out of protective instinct and pushes his mistress away with full force, desperately calling out her name. The deformed monster falls like a ravenous beast upon the position where the two had been moments before. The loyal security guard heroically positions himself as a human shield and pleads with his lady to flee as quickly as possible. Seoa is thrown to the ground and reaches out in despair as she watches her friend sacrifice herself to contain the demon's fury. The pavilion owner grinds her teeth in sheer helplessness and frustration at the terrible, dangerous situation. Understanding Gyu's sacrifice, she lunges back and screams desperately, demanding that her friend survive this deadly battle. In her panicked thoughts, she cries out for the main heir of the Luoyang clan, questioning where the Dark Sovereign could be at such a critical moment. The shockwave caused by Geumju's devastating blow destroys the rest of the roof, generating an immense storm of debris. The villain growls in frustration upon noticing that her main target managed to dodge the initial claw attack. She watches Seoa retreat from above and mocks her, saying that fleeing so cowardly will never save the life of the pavilion's owner. However, an imposing hero with a heavy sword suddenly emerges from the dust to block the villain's advance, ordering her to stop immediately and declaring himself to be her true opponent. Gyumju grinds her teeth in pure fury and shouts at her opponent to get out of her way immediately. Gyu assumes a firm stance with his sword drawn and warns her that she will need to retreat if she doesn't want to lose her life. The young security guard in the black mask proudly asserts her martial dignity and that she will not go down without a fight. However, she knows that the power difference between them represents an almost insurmountable barrier. Scholars often define that every martial artist eventually reaches a power limit where their progress ceases, encountering a truly insurmountable wall. It is also said that those rare warriors who manage to break through this barrier acquire such colossal power that they become completely different people, restarting their growth. Because of this, underworld legends refer to those few strong ones who have crossed the spiritual wall only as true masters. As the oppressive wind blows fiercely, raising dust in the courtyard, Gyu prepares for the imminent clash with the villainess. Observing her opponent's fury up close, the bodyguard realizes with horror that Gumju's current strength is truly immense. She bitterly acknowledges that the villain's combat level is far beyond her own capabilities, which barely managed to reach the limit of the power wall. Gyu concludes in a panic that the blonde in the suit is a legitimate master who has overcome all barriers, seeing her opponent advance with eyes glowing red. A colossal metallic clash of swords echoes through the inner courtyard as the two warriors violently collide their forces. They exchange glances filled with hatred and tension in the millisecond following the clash of blades. Gumju displays its immense red claw, bristling with bulging veins and destructive energy, to subdue the opponent's defense. The villain unleashes a storm of extremely fast and violent slashing attacks against the cornered bodyguard. Gyu is in complete shock, trying to block the successive blows, wondering how her opponent's arm is able to perform such bizarre movements. Gumju's demonic claw extends grotesquely, unleashing a new and overwhelming sequence of razor-sharp slashes in the air. A powerful explosion of force breaks the young security guard's resistance, brutally throwing her against the rocky ground. The villain laughs maniacally and mocks Gyu's previous promise, questioning whether she truly believed she could face her with such pathetic power. Without giving her opponent time to breathe, she summons multiple palm strikes of red spiritual energy to crush the young woman's resistance once and for all. Gyu is completely bombarded and overwhelmed by her opponent's relentless sequence of aerial strikes. The security guard's body collides with extreme violence against the wooden planks of the balcony amidst shattered glass. Gumju looms victoriously over the fallen victim and raises her immense claw, ready to deliver the coup de grace. Staring at impending death with one wide eye, Gyu listens as the villainess murmurs that useless pests must be eliminated from her path. With a furious cry ordering her to get out of her way, the blonde unleashes her final slashing blow with full force. A massive explosion of fire and red dust completely consumed the area where the bodyguard lay. Gyu is thrown by the shockwave, feeling her entire body suffer from the violent impact of the attack. She falls to her knees on the stone floor, spitting blood and coughing in excruciating pain amidst the cloud of smoke. Supporting herself with a trembling hand on the cracked floor, the young woman continues to vomit blood due to the severe internal injuries sustained in the fight. Gyumju slowly approaches with a calm and imposing expression, exuding her dark, monstrous energy upon her wounded opponent. With a sadistic grin full of sharp teeth, the blonde woman is ironically surprised that the security guard survived a direct attack of that caliber. She mockingly praises the security guard's physical stamina, while Gyu gasps for breath and desperately tries to regain his strength. Looking at the pools of blood around her, the young woman realizes to herself that the repeated use of her martial arts techniques had completely depleted her internal energy far too quickly. She desperately wonders how many more times she can withstand those brutal claw attacks from her armed opponent. The memory of the red spiritual palms that bombarded her previously continues to haunt the wounded security guard's mind. Gyu wonders in utter despair what on earth could have happened to Gyumju's physical structure to make her reach that monstrous level of strength. The villain's leather boot takes another firm step across the wooden floor, breaking the tense silence of the courtyard. Gumju assumes a menacing stance to end her opponent's life, while the security guard trembles as she attempts to raise her sword in a final, futile attempt at defense. The blonde becomes irritated by the girl's complete lack of response after her sarcastic compliment, displaying furious marks on her distorted face. With her eyes gleaming red, the villain calls her an insolent girl, noticing her fighting spirit still alive even in that deplorable state. A colossal storm of red and dark energy condenses around Gyumju as she prepares her final, devastating attack. Gyu trembled in terror as she sensed firsthand the immense and overwhelming murderous intent of her opponent. The villain challenges her to try and block the next blow before advancing at extreme speed towards her. A gigantic, crimson spiritual slash rips through the courtyard air, aimed directly at the head of the cornered young woman. The bodyguard closes her eyes, accepting her sad fate, desperately resigning herself to the fact that she is about to lose her life right there. Suddenly, an immense and heavy stone shield with iron spikes appears out of nowhere to intercept and block Gyumju's deadly blow. A mysterious young woman with her hair tied in two buns appears like a bolt of lightning, executing a spectacular defense against the villain amidst the sparks. Gyu opens her eyes abruptly and lets out a cry of utter astonishment upon realizing she was saved at the last second. Still lying on the stone ground, she tries to discern through the dust the true identity of that mysterious warrior who defended her. To everyone's surprise, the newcomer merely manages a mischievous and confident smile, demonstrating complete composure even in the face of the fury of that demon from the Black Bones faction. The mysterious ally smiles sweetly and jokingly asks if they made her wait long for reinforcements. The enemy warrior collapses in utter shock upon witnessing the colossal Gumju being hurled backward by the force of the impact. The immense, bearded companion in dark robes lands firmly on the patio after delivering his spectacular defense. The young woman with her hair in buns joyfully celebrates that she is all right and proclaims herself their true rescue cavalry. The bearded warrior wields his immense sword to protect her, warning the young woman in a panicked tone to be very careful of the villain's attacks. Feeling the pressure of the clashing blades, he admits that Geumju is indeed a formidable and extremely dangerous opponent. Even though her companion expressed disbelief about the possibility of escaping alive, the girl firmly insisted that they would win if they fought together. Gyu watches the scene, sweating with terror, knowing that that trio alone would never be able to contain the fury of that demon. The young woman with buns admits with a disheartened expression that they are the only reinforcements available for the battle at that moment. The bodyguard remains kneeling behind the new defenders, desperately trying to regain her strength for the imminent combat. Supporting herself with a trembling hand against the damp floor, she struggles with all her might to stand up again. She wields her sword with determination alongside her companions, deciding that they have no other option but to face the danger head-on. The trio of heroes take a defensive stance against the colossal Geumju, which gleams enveloped in a whirlwind of pure, malevolent red energy. The villain laughs with superiority and mockingly challenges them to attack all at once, like the insignificant insects they are. Meanwhile, the last rays of twilight paint the horizon clouds with dramatic shades of red and orange. In the courtyard of the main fortress, the remaining warriors of the pavilion continue to fight bravely and tend to their wounded comrades. Coa observes the chaotic scene with an extremely worried and tense expression, facing the losses of her gang. The immense central pavilion continues to burn under colossal flames, spreading a black, suffocating smoke throughout the military complex. The informant demands to know from her subordinate if there really aren't any other martial artists available to reinforce her group's defenses. The man laments that they won't be able to get help from anyone else in time, causing the leader to tremble with panic as she orders the third unit to retreat. One of the wounded soldiers is hurriedly carried by his comrade, who shouts desperately about the large number of casualties suffered in the courtyard. More desperate reports are coming in from all directions, indicating that the 17th unit is also under severe attack and needs urgent help. Seoa falls into complete despair upon hearing that the 10th unit has also begun its retreat, realizing that this humiliating defeat makes absolutely no martial sense. Cries of pain and pure agony continue to echo through the courtyard as the sun finally sets behind the silhouettes of the buildings. One of the assassins in the pavilion is brutally struck down by the enormous battle axe of an enemy mercenary. Another soldier tries to hold off the onslaught of a heavy halberd with all his remaining strength, letting out a groan of pure physical suffering. He is astonished by the monstrous physical strength displayed by the Black Bones faction henchmen in that violent combat. Even when one of the red-eyed monsters is stabbed deep in the stomach, it merely smiles disdainfully and completely ignores the fatal wound. The assassin recoils in terror upon realizing that the giant doesn't even seem to feel the pain of the blade embedded in his body. In the next second, the giant crushes his opponent's chest with a brutal stomp from his heavy military boot. The silhouette of yet another fighter from the pavilion is mercilessly pierced by the enemy's sword, splattering fresh blood across the battlefield. Gyu observes the courtyard littered with the corpses of his comrades strewn on the ground, feeling the weight of that terrible military defeat. The red-eyed mercenaries continue to spread terror and death with their colossal weapons without showing any sign of fatigue. The harsh clash of swords and the cries of dying combatants fill every corner of the burning fortress. Gyu stares at the horizon with an expression consumed by utter despair as he watches yet another of his best men fall lifeless. She laments that the situation has become a truly uncontrollable chaos, resembling a horde of demons devastating the region. The security guard focuses his gaze amidst the smoke and red puddles covering the cracked stone floor of the courtyard. She concludes bitterly that Geumju's fortress has become a veritable hell on earth for all of them. Back in the main dungeon, the wounded villainess laughs disgustingly and mocks the weakness displayed by the young woman with her hair in loose buns on the floor. With a distorted and macabre expression, Geumju ironically confesses that he had hoped the reinforcement group could hold out a little longer in combat. Gyu positions herself protectively in front of her wounded ally, fighting back a cold sweat of despair as she faces the approaching villain. At that moment, an ancient, cracked, mystical gem with a greenish glow begins to pulsate intensely in the fallen young woman's bracelet. The girl spits up a large amount of blood and holds her mouth shut with great difficulty due to the serious injuries. The blonde laughs hysterically and confesses that she feels immense sadistic pleasure in watching the suffering and downfall of the weak warriors before her. She cruelly promises to send her employer to the same fate very soon so that neither of them will feel lonely in death. The security guard in the black tunic stares at her fallen companion with immense sadness, aware that her chances of survival are practically nil. She fondly remembers desperately ordering her beloved mistress to flee that place as quickly as possible. In her final moments, the loyal Gyu silently wonders if Seoa actually managed to escape that terrible massacre alive. She grips the hilt of her broken sword with all the strength and determination that remains in her wounded body. The young woman sketches a beautiful and fearless smile at the corner of her bloodied lips, whispering that she will fight bravely even knowing she has no chance of victory. Despite being gravely wounded and bleeding, Gyu raises her broken weapon with determination and solemnly vows that she will not retreat an inch before her opponent. Geumju laughs contemptuously and decides to put a definitive end to the fight, telling her opponent to wait for her mistress in the afterlife. The transformed villain unleashes a fierce and colossal attack of red energy towards the trapped security. Gyu stared wide-eyed at imminent death, the scarlet glare of the enemy's onslaught reflecting on his terrified face. In the distance, the eye-patch-wearing informant watches the brutal scene in utter despair and screams the name of her loyal comrade in arms. Suddenly, the atmosphere on the battlefield changes drastically, and Seoa turns her head, sensing a cold and terrifying energy taking over the place. The entire courtyard is engulfed in a strange visual distortion that leaves the pavilion's owner completely paralyzed with astonishment. She focuses her gaze amidst the sudden darkness and cries out in sheer terror as she tries to understand the origin of that mystical phenomenon. Both allies and henchmen of the Black Bones faction freeze on guard, panicked and wondering why the world around them has simply gone dark out of nowhere. Seoa hugs her own arms in the face of the unbearable, biting cold that has begun to spread throughout the military complex. She lets out a gasping sigh of icy smoke as eternal night seems to descend and completely engulf the enemy hideout. The combat is abruptly interrupted as the wounded warriors try to identify the invisible presence that moves silently in the shadows. The lancers and other mercenaries of the fortress look upwards, their faces pale with pure horror at what is to come. Absolutely everyone present on the battlefield can feel firsthand the immense spiritual pressure of that moment. The absolute icy darkness of the night completely envelops the immense structures of the military fortress under the hidden moonlight. Seoa stares into the dim light, with tears in her eyes as she realizes that the moment of final judgment has finally arrived for them all. Amidst a shimmering whirlwind of purple flames, the iconic white mask that mocks the law of men materializes in the darkness. An extremely calm and menacing voice echoes from the midst of the spiritual smoke, ominously asking if they were expecting its arrival. The eye-patch-wearing informant trembles with sheer terror as she recognizes from afar that intimidating silhouette that has just descended from the heavens. Enveloped in a colossal storm of mystical power and still holding on to his wooden disguise, Yeon So-yeon officially reveals himself as the dreaded Dark Sovereign, ready to begin his relentless hunt against sinners.